Apartment dwellers of Reddit, what secrets have you learned about your neighbors through your paper-thin walls? NSW. Been a few years ago, but the family living next to me had a daughter about 13 or 14 years old, and her mom walked in on her laying face down in the bathroom floor trying to take a picture of either her butthole, vag, or both to send to some 30-something guy she met online. I know all of these details because mom shouted them at dad when he got home from work and berated daughter for hours. Mom also called the police to report the guy asking for the pictures. I ate my supper cold because I didn't want to make microwave noise in the kitchen because mom was on a roll and it was pretty crazy. Years ago I lived in an apartment with the thinnest walls I've ever encountered. I could hear everything and my neighbor and his girlfriend were quite active to say the least. One day I started thinking, her voice sounds different. Oh no. Sure enough, the next day the girlfriend comes over and they had a huge fight. I don't know how she found out, but she found out pretty quickly. She sounds like a man squatting more than his ability when she fricks. She shoots at 430 pounds on the wall due to constipation. Her ex-husband likes to frick her in the kitchen, with the windows open so everyone can hear. Some butthole who lives right above me is a lot louder than he seems to think he is. Just the other night, I learned he's quitting alcohol and switching to wine. That the cop next door is way too nosy. The kids who lived above me used to throw parties all the time. Loud music, drunken yelling, the works. He thought it was me, and apparently my RFDC shirt, a parody of the AC/DC logo but for a science thing, was proof enough. He called the cops on me one night when the kids threw a party again. I opened my door in my Star Wars pajamas to two uncomfortable looking cops. They take one look at me, apologized, and explained the mistake. I found out later it was my neighbor when he got in my face about the noise I was making. It was my sewing machine, at 2 in the afternoon. I heard my neighbor give birth when I was a kid. It was planned. There were a bunch of people there and she did it in a bathtub or something. My neighbors used to get really high and make crazy food and eat snacks loudly late into the night. My favorite thing I ever heard as I was passing by was, "Dude, yes, and then put some freaking cheese in it, dude. You mean stuff it inside the bell pepper? Frick yes. And then put that crap in the oven." Loud moaning. Ex and I heard neighbors going at it, younger couple around our age. Their bedroom against our bedroom, layouts are mirrored. We laughed really hard about it at first, then it got really annoying, so we basically started making all the noises at the same time they did. After about couple months of doing the noises to them, I ran into the neighbor getting mail and we both cracked up hard. Came to find out they had heard us fricking first and started making noises, which we thought was them fricking, so for the past few months the four of us were literally laying in bed moaning at each other through the walls. Everyone seems to have neighbors who frick a lot. I heard my neighbors get into a fight because she won't frick her husband anymore. Hey neighbor. I learned that my neighbor is a nice guy and a good father. I always hear him and his wife playing with their baby and being goofy. It's really cute and a nice change from my last neighbors who would scream and beat each other. I learned that my old neighbor's kid is an adventurer in the body of a 9-year-old boy. The first conversation I ever heard between mother and son was something akin to her shrieking, "What are you doing to the carpet?" "I'm digging a hole, Mom." I often heard her crying and one time asking him if he'd prefer to live with his dad, because he seemed miserable with her. She thought that was why he was acting out. He ended up crying, too, and begging her to let him stay, so he did, and at least they seemed to get on better after that. To not end on a sour note, the funniest thing I think I heard was her shrieking, "Oh my god, where did your clothes go? Not here. What are you doing? I'm free, Mom. I'm free." She scolded him, but after I heard him stomp off, I heard her laughing pretty hard on the other side of the wall. Sometimes I can feel when my neighbor uses the toilet. If I'm in my bathroom, especially on the toilet, I feel a shift upwards as if they say down at the same table as me. The devil's seesaw. My Chinese neighbor sings to someone through the phone about 3 nights a week. I don't know what he is saying, but it sounds like he really loves whoever it is he is singing to. I don't really get annoyed by it because I think it's a pretty sweet thing to do. It's to the point now that if I don't hear singing for a while I get a little worried about him. My neighbor has a promising career in opera, unfortunately. My old neighbor was really lonely and adorable. She talked to her 2 dogs all the time. Her husband had died, so she lived there next door to us. It was sad, but we had a friendship with her. We would visit with our son occasionally, even after we moved. My neighbor next to me has an unhappy relationship. The neighbor above me is gay and has dreams of going to Broadway. He also might be an insomniac. That their obnoxious music played late at night is played through a Bluetooth device that I can control. It isn't a secret since the whole freaking apartment can hear it, but apparently my next door neighbor likes to watch Michael Bay movies at full volume. My upstairs neighbors absolutely love to move their furniture around. I assume this is supposed to be a secret because it only happens between 3 am 4 am. It turns out that they don't spend any time in their apartment and instead have hour-long conversations outside my freaking door in the hallway. Next time, set up a lawn chair and get some popcorn, then open the door and slowly eat it while watching them. Chris keeps freaking everything up. Screams of Chris this, Chris that, etc etc. At my last place it was Ethan. Ethan was a little kid, the lady's grandchild. She'd command him like a dog. Ethan, get off the couch. Get off the couch, Ethan. My next door neighbor used to constantly break up with her boyfriend and have loud sobbing phone calls with her friends late at night. One time a friend even called the police because he was worried she would kill herself. I saw the police walking down the hall as I was coming home and they thought I was her at first. Then they went into her apartment and spoke for 30 minutes about love, pills and the importance of staying resilient in the face of breakups. The officer was a great guy, but I heard way too much. I've learned that my neighbor probably abuses his wife. Which of the 3 am hallway arguments brought me to that conclusion? Was it the one where she locked him out and he tried to break down the door? Or the one where 4 separate neighbors called the cops because they were screaming at each other for almost an hour? No. The one that really fixed my impression of him is when he chased her down the stairs carrying a freaking metal pipe and he swung so hard at her that he broke off a chunk of the concrete. I kept the broken shards as a souvenir for the cops. Just got my first solo apartment and I'm loving it. Most of the people are my age and really cool, but there is this needle thin probably 50-60 older woman that walks the halls day and night. Every single day, she waits for people to come out of their apartment and then sparks up very strange conversations. Looked out my window the other night at about 1 am and she's wandering around the parking lot picking up cigarette butts and smoking them. Those short conversations probably mean everything to her, TBH. My upstairs neighbor is a fast learner. About a year ago he started practicing basic scales on his sax. Now he's jamming out up there and I'm really into it. He's horrifyingly inappropriate and violent when playing games online. I hope that's what he's doing. A young couple moved next door with a toddler and a new puppy. Aside from the occasion crying from kid or puppy, I mostly just hear the kid running around and giggling really loud and the sound of a ball bouncing off the wall and the puppy chasing after it. On the other side of my apartment the family loves Eurodance music. My neighbor's teenage daughter sent some nudes via Facebook and got caught by her mom. That girl got yelled at like I've never heard. And I heard it all because I turned off everything in my place that made noise and stood with my ear against the wall basically the entire time. I moved in my new apartment last year and had a month of silence before all heck broke loose. Over the course of a few months I learned their schedule, names, and even small nuances that gave me a hunch that this person's child may be autistic, just based on sound. Turns out, the child is, so whenever I hear screaming or stomping I try to sympathize. Crap still sucks though. I used to hear my neighbors freaking. Then 2 22-year-old guys moved in, who are pretty cool. As far as I know, one goes out with his girlfriend a lot, the other plays hours of Rocket League. I like the second guy better. I don't know if this is a secret, but I heard the dude trying to kill his GF. Called the police. Dude left in handcuffs. A few stories come to mind. Older couples in their 70s lived on second floor. They would cook me food, I would shovel their cars out in the winter. Here's the fun part, they had the loudest intercourse several times a week. God bless their vigor. Made a new friend in one apartment by having the smell of dank weed seep into my apartment walls in a duplex. Currently living next to a rock star who unknowingly serenades me every so often when he's preparing for a gig. All in all, I've had a good run. My neighbor has been learning to play guitar for almost a year now. He's gotten a lot better. I think my upstairs neighbor enjoys having animalistic intercourse. Seriously, it sounds like a dang herd of elephants sometimes. It's either a fight club or an orgy club. I'm in a dorm. I know everything about the love life of my 3 neighbors, mostly because they tend to shriek about it at 2 AM. Also, I know that I can take them down with glitter, as the one time someone put balloons and glitter on their door it started a screaming match between the girls that lasted all day. I have plans. Do it. Lived in a 4 apartment strip back in the 90s. Quiet, peaceful, perfect. One Saturday afternoon, I'm sitting on the couch watching TV and hear a gunshot. Second later, another. I run next door and pound on the door. Can't get in. So I call 911. Tell them this and cops show up pretty quick. Turns out the elderly couple next door did a murder-suicide pact. They juggle bowling balls at 3 AM. Interesting hobby. I'm guessing they juggle poorly. My neighbor likes to be humiliated. From what I can hear, he likes to ask to be ass blasted with the closest object. This happens a lot of weekends. He invites guys over for poker. They always get really drunk and loud, and it usually involves what I can only deduce to be a gay oily man bear orgy. My new downstairs neighbor is a middle-aged, maybe 50, woman, and I hear her crying loudly to herself and on the phone with people all the time. From what I've heard, her husband was abusive and kicked her out for a stripper. I used to live in this very hip, loft-style apartment building. It attracted a lot of young people. The people in the apartment next to me were college students. The walls were so thin if they were having a conversation on speakerphone in their living room, I could hear 75% of the conversation. It sucked, but once you got used to it, it wasn't a huge deal. One night a friend and I come back, rather late, from a night at my local watering hole, and we can hear the guy next door getting lucky. We both giggle to ourselves, but whatever, good for him. I go into my room to crash and my buddy hits the couch. A few seconds later we both hear as clear as day a girl's voice saying, "I won't lick your butthole but I will give you head." My buddy and I both start laughing our asses off. Dude next door pounds a few times on the wall and yells, "Hey man, give me some space, good times." This one guy can destroy his spouse. Sounds like a tentacle anime over there. That he's black. He was rapping really loudly one night. My apartment walls are actually pretty thick, so all I could hear was muffled mumbling, except for the hook, which was him loudly screaming, "Cause I'm frickin' black UH." The woman next door has a relationship with her cat. That's interesting. She's a recluse in her mid-40s. Nothing wrong with that, but she doesn't seem to be handling it well. She treats it like a human, and I'm not talking about how much she loves it. Her relationship with it plays out as if he were an actual family member. Dynamics and all. They have fights. A lot. Mostly, she feels that he neglects her feelings and doesn't appreciate how much time she puts into being at work and doing all of the housework. She wishes he would at least help take the trash out. And when she has fun times with herself, she doesn't understand why he complains about having to go outside. Last night they had another fight, but I got home late, so I don't know what it was about. She spent about an hour throwing things, and eventually kicked him out for a while. It's weird. I had cops called on me for suspected domestic abuse when I was fresh out of college. I lived alone at the time, and what happened was I beat the crap out of my box fan after a 5-game losing streak on CI ladder. When I was younger, I moved into this new apartment complex. First night there, it started moaning. Every night around 11 PM I hear this couple fricking loudly. I admit that I found it a bit entertaining, because it never went on for too long, until a couple weeks later, I see the guy walking out of his apartment. 75 years old and quite husky. Nobody was fricking. I was listening to his pee over surround sound. Here's a fun story. Husband and I moved into a townhouse. Old building from 1920. Brick walls between units. We didn't hear a thing from the neighbors. Like literally no sounds at all. We weren't even sure anyone was living next door until we met them because it was so quiet. So, we figured the soundproofing was excellent. Husband and I were never quiet. We had no reason to be. We have 2 AM dance parties in our kitchen screaming to outcast as loud as we possibly could. Then, the neighbors moved out and a new couple moved in. The second they showed up, we heard everything they did. Every single quiet conversation. Every time someone closed a cabinet. Every tiny sound we heard. It was not soundproof. The first couple was just incredibly quiet and we were huge, gigantic buttholes. It's been years and I still feel bad. My neighbors slashed my tires and I'm about to sign them up for every mailing list I can think of. What are small legal ways you have gotten back at someone that has wronged you? My dad ran a concrete company a while back. They had an issue over a driveway that they did for a company that was putting up a premier neighborhood. Anyways, the company was refusing to pay, so my dad parked his crappy old work truck in front of their show homes with huge sign in it saying XXXXXXX concrete is suing XXXXX homes over shady business practices. They settled out of court the next day. If you really wanted to get back at them, sign them up for the local chapter of the Jehovah's Witnesses. My brother did this to me. It was horrible. Put a shortcut to shut down eggs in their startup folder. My new butthole neighbors cut some bushes that were planted on their side of the fence off at the top of the fence, leaving a bunch of excess plant matter to die hanging over on my side. I retaliated by severely trimming back all of my trees that were providing shade to their AC units and windows as to heat up their house and cost them money. It'll cost them hundreds over a few years, maybe. Put glitter in their shampoo. I don't care how, just find a way. In their cars events. I hated my apartment neighbor, so I applied him to every online school in America and a few Texas tourism agencies. This is my hack. I checked out what a grad school loan would be through Voyeurism once, and they must have contracts with a bunch of online universities because I was hassled by them for about 4 months. The best thing you can do is use the legal method. Your tires were fine before they impounded it. After it was impounded, they were slashed. File a police report, let your insurance know. At the very least, you can also contact a lawyer if you wish to either sue the towing company or the neighbors. Do not confront them yourself, since it will probably only make them angrier. If you want to go even more legal on them, there may be some city ordinance that prevents them from building a fence like that. Contact your local zoning commission. Make a complaint. If you have a lot of time and energy, you could even join the zoning board to get it taken down. Depending on where you are in law, this may be a fairly easy thing to do. Legal revenge is the best revenge. I should add, as always, this is not legal advice, and I am not a lawyer. Seriously, contact a real lawyer if you've got a problem. My best guess on the toll lot issue is that they are, to some degree, responsible for the cars they tow, and that they would have a hard time convincing a judge or a mediator that the slashed tires aren't their problem at all. We once shared a floor in a housing project with a young man who forever endeavored to upset and unsettle anyone and everyone within earshot of his apartment. From screaming matches with his dealer to starting small fires in the hallway, barely a night went by that we didn't see, smell or somehow suffer his presence in the building. After an evening which ended with a rage-addled guest of his kicking on every door on the floor before defecating massively in the stairwell, the ladies living to our left decided to do their best to match his superlative dowry, by way of a series of small advertisements posted in the pubs, clubs and pool halls of our town listing his phone number and home address. They ensured a steady stream of human traffic harassing him for months. As I later learned, they'd snipped a snap of a comely lass from the local newspaper, covered her eyes and listed charges for adult services well below market prices. The result was an incessant stream of calls and visitors seeking bargain BJs and discount dong teasing after a long evening of drinking. Many of them understandably truculent on discovering that any dong pleasing that day would have to be self-inflicted. Not only was it a fair few months before the flow of disappointed punters dried up, but the inclusion of his address led to a visit by a contingent of coppers who came looking for H but found a stash instead. That young man went away for a while after that, and when he came back he was as good as gold. TLDR. Noisy, no good neighbor advertised as escort, rumbled by the fuzz for drugs. Truck, you. lentric-hilmed. Adjective, eager or quick to argue or fight, aggressively defiant. If they don't have a kid, make sure you sign them up for baby websites. That crap never ends. Someone did this to me a couple of years ago and I still get formula samples in the mail. You'd think they'd look at when the name was signed up and think, hey, the kid's 5 years old now. Get yourself a rotisserie chicken from your local grocery store. Have a nice chicken dinner. Maybe invite a girl over. Have a nice bottle of wine and watch a movie. But keep the bones and the cuts of meat. Then get yourself a nicely sized glass jar. Make sure it's a mason jar, so it's airtight. Next, put the bones and meat in the jar, and add milk, maybe an egg for good measure. Voila, your weapon. Now place this near an air intake in their home, preferably in a vent if you can. Dryer vent will work fine, and probably best. The deal is, this milk and chicken will rot in the jar. Crap gets rank as your crazy Uncle Ed's breath after drinking the end of a jar of pickles on garlic dish night. As it rots, gas builds up in the jar. Give it a month or so, and this gas gets built up to the point that it shatters the jar. Guess what? Your neighbors have got the most disgusting fluid known to man dripping into their home. The smell won't go away for weeks. It will be so bad they will probably leave. This, gentlemen, is the chicken dairy bomb. About 9 years ago, someone convinced our elderly office manager to get lightning insurance billed to each of our 6 business lines at $9.95 a month. They totally strong-armed her into doing it, too. From what she said, I called the company's 800 number at 6 PM to complain, but it was after hours and all they had was a recording that they were closed. I did, however, notice that the recording repeated forever instead of playing once and hanging up. I took all 6 voice lines, 2 fax lines, and 4 cell phones and called the 800 number and let the line sit on hold every night for a week, while racking up an absolute fortune for the company on their toll-free line. Frick those guys. Good luck with that. Considering they already slashed your tires, I'm sure confronting them will go very well. Yeah, it might not go so well. Do they have a nice lawn? Every once in a while fill a water balloon with water and a ton of bleach. Toss it over the fence onto the lawn. Dead spot. That's really evil, especially in my neighborhood where the hoe will call you and fine you if your lawn isn't nice looking. I know because my mom used to over fertilize her lawn and get yellow dead spots and they would harass her about it. Confronting them directly sounds like a recipe for disaster. However, letting the Democratic or Republican National Committee, or ideally both, know that they might be interested in more information. Put their phone number on Craigslist somewhere under one of the personals. Expect many text messages, voicemails, and calls throughout the night. Dinkelberg. One time an ex-friend borrowed $500. Of course he doesn't pay me. Welches. Avoids calls, emails, etc. So this guy always parked on the street, lived in a nice part of town. So in the cold winters after my buddies and I left the bar, being the DD I'd take everyone for food. Since most of the guys needed to take a pee, I'd usually take a pit stop at the Welsh's house and my mates would urinate all over his car. It'd freeze all over his car. Also, since I didn't think that was enough punishment, we rented the exact same model and color vehicle as the Welsher, put his plates on the rental and would deliberately drive through intersections with red light cameras and get him ticketed. Afterwards we'd put his plate back on. That was amazing. We were careful and did this at like 3 AM, but he must have got around $3,000 in traffic violations. Felt great. I'm not sure if you're a complete butthole or a genius. If they are people that keep a neat and pristine lawn, you could always throw down the thistle seed that the birds eat. You'll be feeding the birds and ruining their lawn with weeds at the same time. I just sprinkle powdered milk all over their yard. When the sprinklers turn on making milk and then by midday you have curdled milk. You know, you can make the impound lot pay for the tires. If they say they came in that way on their report, your neighbors are suspects for the vandalism and the police can sort it out. Also, towing and labor to an impound lot would require that you were blocking a fire hydrant or handicapped space. No reputable towing company can legally tow you for parking on a street or in a labeled parking spot, like Sea Commander apartment numbered spots, until it has been occupied for 96 hours by you. I don't know if driveways are part of the city code for illegal parking, and likely they are considered fire lanes or something stupid like that. But a lot of times businesses that say they will tow at owner's expense actually end up having to pay the fees themselves, and it can only be moved to another spot, not impounded. Maybe some rookie cop took the call and impounded it as a rookie mistake. P.S. My source for the towing laws is a towing company in California who were unable to tow an butthole who parked in my spot at my apartment for 2 days. They showed me the state laws regarding what can and can't be towed. This was about 8 months ago. Frick legal. These people clearly don't care about the goddamned law if they slashed your fricking tires. Gorilla glue their doors shut. You evil son of a bee. Slightly different, but in college when we got the hundreds of credit card applications in the mail, we would fill the prepaid envelopes with rocks and send them back. The post office would charge them for the extra weight. One time we taped one to a cinder block. The mailman told us technically he wasn't supposed to take it, but did anyway because he thought it was funny. Screw legal. Buy multiple chains and a couple padlocks, and in the middle of the night when no one can see you, put all the chains and locks on their gate so that it cannot be opened without quite a bit of effort. But wear gloves, just in case, and put the lock on the outside of the fence. Wrap the chain so tight the gate can't move. Get the best, strongest chain you can possibly find. Love this idea. Vigilante justice is 100 times more effective than petty legal routes. Source: I'm the goddamn Batman. You can buy a valve stem remover from an AutoZone. $3 or $4, I think, and with that, remove the valve stems from their tires, flattening them in seconds. Then watch as they try to air their tires, but to no avail. You're gonna go to a hardware store and buy nails that are long enough to puncture the wall of the tire. Next, sneak over at night and wedge one nail at an angle behind each tire of their car. Wake up extra early the next morning, make an amazing breakfast and be patient. When they back the car out of the driveway to leave for work, your ears will be filled with the angelic melody of hissing air and furious profanities. Enjoy your breakfast, newly seasoned with the tears of your enemies. Oh, and if you're really dedicated, let the air out of the tires first, then use Fix-A-Flat to refill them. It's illegal in CA for any tire place to repair a tire that's had Fix-A-Flat used in it. My dad is a Reagan-era Republican and we got in a little tiff a few months back. I donated to the Democratic Party using my parents' address and house phone number. What followed was non-stop Democratic Initiative phone calls and mail. My permanent residence this election season was his addy. Cat facts. That is all. A hit had decided to frick with my computer as a prank. In return, I posted an ad on Craigslist for a birthday party clown. I said I was a poor college student that needed extra cash. I did it for my lily brother and his friends' parties. Can do magic and balloon animals. $10 HR, no minimum. Then I put his cell number. Priceless. If you Google /tires Sunset Hollywood, this thread is right near the top of the charts. Which means you shouldn't do anything that will start a feud unless you're sure they don't know how to Google. You've just admitted to committing identity theft. So if your neighbors have friends on the police force, you could end up with cops tracking you down from your Reddit account. Not to mention a civil case if they're angry and rich enough. And heck, you don't even know for sure it was your neighbors. It could have been the buttholes who towed your car. And you already met the towing people, so you know those guys are buttholes. I'm just guessing at that, because they always are. In a small town you might find a nice mechanic running a truck on the side, but in bigger cities the impound industry is full of scum and psychopaths who love to frick people over and then charge them exorbitant fees for it. So I would approach them, ask if they did this, see what they say, go from there, or just let it go. Putting pebbles in the dust caps on their tires would work wonders. It lets the air out slow, so if you time it right, they'll have a flat while they are not at home, instead of just coming out to find flat tires. Repeat this. Most people will never know it is happening, because they never find the evidence. It usually falls out when the cap is removed and no one knows. I was told BBs are good for that. You are entering the neighbor war games. I was drafted when I was in my early teens in my neighborhood and reigned supreme in each battle. The battle of the cars was very much like your battle of the driveway. My battle plan at the time was this. My dad hunted on occasion and had a large bottle of skunk essence. Obtain 1. My grandmother was diabetic and gave herself shots daily with small syringes. Obtain 1. Hopefully they have a car they're proud enough of that this attack will carry some sting. My neighbor's was a new Mercedes. Sneak over at night and stick the syringe through the window weather strip and squirt the skunk essence all over the interior. Do not soak any one spot but sort of spray it all over so that they cannot detect one spot that contains the stench. Do this earlier in the dead of night instead of later, like 1 instead of 4, to allow a good soak and maybe even dry time. The odor is genuinely animal and they will likely not suspect human delivery. I've helped lots of folks in the last 25 years exact the same revenge, and in every case, it's ruled that an animal sprayed the vent area near the windshield. BTW. It cannot be removed. Understand this will total their vehicle unless they replace everything you spray: carpet, headliner, seats, jute padding, headliner backing. It's effing awful. Buy a $10 car. Buy a wheel clamp. Slash the tires. Park that mother across their driveway. Send them a pinata filled with blood. They're thinking fun times for the kids and instead they get a life-scarring event no one will ever get over. You want to play games? I got more games than Parker Brothers. Sign them up for an NAMBLA membership and request that all correspondence be sent to their work address. Now that is evil. Confront them. Then type up your story with address and pictures and put in mailbox of entire block so everyone knows they are butt clowns. Avoid putting things in mailboxes. The rules regarding those have severe penalties. Future post. Some butthole driver blocked us in. My daughter got sick and needed to go to the hospital, but we had to wait for the tow company to remove his dang car. Now he won't stop harassing us, slashing our tires, signing us up for magazines, etc. What should I do? Just let it go, man. You have no proof that they slashed your tires, and even if you did, you have to live near these people for a long time. Starting a war will cost you more in the long term, so go for a run. Play some video games, or whatever it takes to de-stress and forget it. Yeah, whenever a vehicle is blocking a driveway in an emergency situation, the best thing to do is slash their tires so you're both fricked. OP, that's criminal damage. You'll be better off calling the police, and maybe start house hunting. 2. If they're prepared to slash your tires, that's kind of a huge red flag. The basis is the fact that the potential of a criminal charge is freaking terrifying for most of us. The plan: approach them by first apologizing and then asking if they happened to see anyone messing around with the car or if they were present when the towing service removed your vehicle. Mention that the reason you are asking is for a police report you have filed. Then ask if it would be alright if the investigating officer came around and asked them some questions. While watching them crap themselves over the potential of criminal charges, you politely apologize again and then leave them to stew over what they are going to do or say. Part 2. At this point you could do a few things. Either involve the police, probably a waste of time, wait patiently for a few months and frick with them, or just forget about it. I vote frick with them in a month or 2. Good luck. Confront them and be extremely kind. Apologize for parking there etc. Ask if they happened to see anyone slash your tires. When they say no, mention how it's a shame these hooligans do this sort of thing. And say next thing you know someone's house may be set on fire, or may get shot or stabbed on the way home and never be caught for it, all while staring into their eyes without breaking contact. This will scare the crap out of them, and put them in a fear mode for a while. Also they may not frick with you again. Take a funnel, wedge it into the rubber gasket between the car window and the door. Pour the milk into the funnel which will fill the inside of their door with milk. You don't want to pour too much into each door, because if it starts to drip out the bottom of the door they will know where the smell is coming from. If you use the correct amount, their car will smell like rancid milk after a few days in the heat, and they will never be able to locate the source. You can use other liquids, but I find that milk is just the easiest and quickest to get your hands on. I don't know how legal this is, but if you have a dog or a neighbor who does and you can get access to its poop, smear a little underneath their car door handle so when they go to open the door they get dog crap on their fingers. It is a very unpleasant way to start the day, but overall not too damaging to cause any lasting problems. If you want a more illegal and damaging way, a couple cups worth of sugar in their gas tank will ruin their car. It will caramelize in their engine and really frick it up. The good thing about this is it will take a few days for it to take effect, so it will be unlikely to lead back to you. Finally, bologna can strip paint off of cars, so you can attach a piece of bologna to the back of their car in any shape you want. A dong is the crowd favorite. If left long enough, when the bologna is peeled off, they will have an image left permanently on the side. Sugar won't do crap to the engine. It might frick up the fuel filter, but that's a cheap and easy fix. Gas and sugar won't mix together. Introduce yourself and apologize for blocking them. If you haven't met them, there's a good chance that they had no idea it was your car, or they might have said something before they had it towed. There's also a good chance that someone else slashed the tires. No one wants the tension that comes along with hated neighbors, and you really don't need to escalate what might have just been a misunderstanding. Or, you could just ignore them entirely and cut every wire on the exterior of their house. Make them handle your butt pennies. Done. Take a friend and apologize for parking wrong and inform them about the broken tires. Surely they were intact when towed, right? Then sue the impound and make them testify in court that the tires were intact when you were towed. False testimony is a crime in my jurisdiction, so either the impound or they will get you new tires. Unless you can prove it, you should probably just walk away. Otherwise things could get uglier than just a couple of slashed tires. There is a gross video online of a dude slashing a tire in the blowout, breaking his arm, leaving the bone exposed. Get a copy of that, burn to DVD, write a letter and educate them on the potential risks of their behavior. This is what a good neighbor would do, and it may actually help you with your situation. Redditors who have gone to war with a neighbor. What's your story? My parents' neighbor constantly blows his leaves onto my parents' property. My dad tried to confront him a few times and the guy literally ran away every time. Yes, a grown butt man dropped his leaf blower and ran inside and locked the door and pretended not to be home when he saw my dad coming. On multiple occasions. My father is not a scary man. My dad was finally able to confront him one day. He was super polite and said the guy could blow the leaves into their woods, but just not onto their clean lawn. The guy responded, "Your property doesn't start until 10 feet from the road, so you can't do anything about it. If you want me to stop, sue me." This is technically correct, as the property is off a private road owned by a convent, and per state law the owner of the road also owns the 10 feet of land on either side of the road. So, my dad called up the convent and asked if the neighbor is allowed to dump his leaves on their property. Turns out they don't like that, so now instead of being in a neighborly argument with my parents, he's trying to fight a bunch of nuns in court. Not a good look. I can see that headline now. Nuns throw good book at leaf blowing blowhard. Two neighbors, we will call them A and B, who hated each other. Neighbor A really prided his lawn on being pristine and caused neighbor B no end of grief over things like leaves and lawn clippings ending up on his lawn, even if just because of wind. Police were called multiple times. This went on for a year. Neighbor B got fed up and intentionally planted clover in his lawn. He waited for it to flower and then set up an industrial fan to blow into neighbor A's lawn. I aspire to this man's level of pettiness every day. Should throw birdseed onto his lawn as well. It's more of a Cold War situation. When my boyfriend cuts the grass, even if our neighbor just cut his grass a few days prior, our neighbor, will cut his again the next day. He's an old man who can't stand to have his lawn just a smidge taller than ours. My neighbor and I have a silent agreement where we mow each other's side of the lawn up to the driveway to avoid this. One day he did the favor for me. The next week I did it for him, and so on. Never got brought up, and it's going on to be a 4-year tradition. It's nice because it makes our 45 rotations look seamless and really only adds on 10 minutes to the mow. Had a crappy neighbor that lived downstairs. Did all sorts of loud crap late into the night, usually music and friends. One day I had enough, and after about 10 minutes of very loud music I just started stomping on the floor. He came bursting out of his apartment and pounding on my door. I answered, acting very confused. "You need to stop stomping around. I'm trying to work." "I wasn't stomping." "Yes you were. I was dancing to your crappy music." Turn it down and it'll never happen again. It never happened again. When I was in elementary school, our neighbor's 4 dogs would always poop in our backyard. My mom asked the neighbor many times to pick it up, but he never did. So every morning before school, my mom would send me and my brother on poop patrol. At first we just put the poop in the neighbor's yard, but our neighbor never got the hint. My mom then had us put the poop on his porch and then he got a fence. Looks like you needed a trebuchet. Obviously the right siege weapon for the job. Capable of launching 90 kilograms of poop over 300 meters. Well, it all started one day when they were having their fence put in and one of the workers accidentally snapped one of our tomato plants at the base. So she decided to take it inside and cook all of the green tomatoes into this unbelievably yummy Indian food I can't even begin to pronounce or spell and brought it over as an apology. Then we made fresh cut pasta and gave them some to give the container back because we of course didn't want to keep it. Then they had the audacity to make us some Indian dessert thing that tasted like heaven. By then our garden had started to produce, so we gave them 2 bags of produce that would have gone to waste and they gave us some eggplant dish. So we brought over a tray of cookies and now it's 3 years later and we're in a heated war over who can outfood the other. We're fighting a losing battle though because they are vegetarian and we are not, so we have to modify most of what we make for them, but we have a huge vegetable garden so we have the leg up on that. This is how you're supposed to neighbor. My parents have become best friends with theirs. Keys to each other's houses and all that. They pull pranks on one another and sometimes leave each other food. I once heard the back door open and by the time I got to check it out, there was a rack of ribs still hot wrapped in foil and a dish towel. They're the best. Years ago my upstairs neighbors were wanted felons living in an apartment leased by the lady's brother. They sold drugs out of there. They fricked all times of the day. Loud music 8 AM to 12 AM. Locked their daughter outside for hours at a time so we would do things with her and give her snacks, but you could tell her social and educational development was way behind. After finding their pictures online on the MN50 Most Wanted, I called the police and they didn't believe me. They called me a child. I was 22. All while the neighbors' behavior got worse as more people reported them. It took them 4 months and dozens of phone calls to finally get the police to arrest fugitives they were supposedly looking for. You'd figure that someone with a statewide arrest warrant would lay the frick low and keep to themselves, but I guess wanted criminals aren't usually known for their logical thinking. We had some problems with our former neighbor. He would come over and yell at us over the most random things that were A, never actually wrong, and or B, not actually our fault. Once he came over on a Sunday morning ringing our doorbell and throwing a tantrum about some vines growing on the back fence. My husband went back there with him to check things out, and sure enough, they were growing up from the neighbor's side. Another time my husband was out in our driveway washing out a couple of flower pots and the dude came out of his house and started screaming at us about spraying dirty water into his yard. We weren't. He also called the fire department on us for smoking a brisket. Just lots of small weird incidents like that. This was a relatively normal guy in his 40s with a job, wife and 2 kids, and we live in a pretty nice suburban neighborhood. LOL. It wasn't like it was some crazy old crackpot. They sold the house and moved last year. Thank goodness. And we found out later they'd divorced and apparently had some pretty big financial issues. I guess maybe it was the stress of what was going on in his life, just taking it out on us. Sounds like a man who had no control over things in his life and was grasping at straws for a little control over anything. Hope he's doing better now at least. Background: I use my bicycle to ride to the train station pretty much every day, having to go over the sidewalk for a grand amount of 10 meters before entering the street. File a complaint on him for harassment. My newish neighbor was a goddamn sex maniac. Every night I heard him screwing his boyfriend, and they were loud. I live in a house with a good amount of space between my home and his. Even with our windows closed I could hear them screaming like feral cats. My husband finally had enough of it, so he went next door to tell them, politely, to take it down a notch. The next morning he found a giant dildo with a suction cup on the bottom stuck on the hood of his car with "freak you" carved into the side of the car. His brand new car. Cops were called. They denied it. We had it on camera. They were M-heads. Don't do M, kids. On a week-long cruise, First 2 mornings our neighbors on both sides were ridiculously loud, basically screaming in Spanish and constantly waking us up. We didn't go to bed until 3-4 am, so they cut into your sleep. On third night at around 10-11 pm we go to our room, blasted the TV. Side note, TVs on cruises should be programmed to not go as loud as we made it, and left it like that until 3-4 am. You could hear it outside our door. It was very loud like they were. Next morning, what do you know, the neighbors realized other people can hear them and were quiet the rest of the cruise. One of the few times that being passive aggressive worked out. Live in a dorm with shared kitchen and toilet. One neighbor refused to buy toilet paper and always stole food. During a summer break only him and me were living at the dorm and he continued the practice, so I made some stew and put a lot of laxatives in it. I also left only one roll of toilet paper in the bathroom that was covered in itching power. He was pee, but I'll laugh whenever he tries to scold me for it. I lived next door to a C club for years. They'd start up around 11 pm or midnight and go till dawn. The cops, Brooklyn, were clearly on the take, as they'd repeatedly tell me during the day that the place had been closed down, and yet they were showing up 3 or 4 times a week there to deal with fights. I asked one of them about why they couldn't close the place at 4 am one day after a particularly noisy fight, and they wouldn't even look me in the eye. We had a huge number of beer bottles because I also used the place as a performance rehearsal space, so at a certain point I'd start throwing bottles out my window to smash at their back door when they were noisy. They really hated that, but as I pointed out, what were they going to do? Call the cops? So they eventually managed to keep the noise down. It kinda worked out. Eventually they were gentrified out of existence. Apu. Well, if the police won't help us, I guess we'll just have to take the law into our own hands. Chief Wiggum. Yeah, a lot of people are doing that these days. I told this story about a year ago. Many years ago as a student I rented a downstairs suite in an old post-war bungalow. Initially there was a nice old guy upstairs, but he left, and this awful hillbilly family with a dog moved in. The wife was the worst sort of human garbage, always angry and yelling profanities at her kids and husband all the time. The guy drank like a fish. I don't think I ever saw him sober. Living with that Harridan, I have no doubts as to why. During the day the Harridan was usually drinking and or stoned to the point of insensibility, so instead of letting the dog out in the yard she just let the dog downstairs. There was an area in front of my door downstairs with maybe 20 square feet of floor, and the dog would crap there. It started out once a week but quickly got worse. I tried to talk to them about it, but that bee literally screamed at me. Told me that because the crap was on my floor that it was my mess to deal with. I called the landlord several times but he didn't care. I was paying my very cheap rent and that's all that mattered. I considered all sorts of things to stop the problem, but there was no such thing as renters' rights back then, and as long as it was happening in a private dwelling they were breaking no laws. I didn't want to hurt the dog. He was actually a nice, friendly lab shepherd mix. Huge dog with huge turds, but other than that we got along fine. It was clearly the owners who were the problem. I had to put up with it for another 3 months. I didn't have anywhere else to go and I couldn't afford to move at the drop of a hat. I needed 3 months rent in my pocket to pay a new damage deposit and advance rent to get into a new apartment. I had to skip meals and stopped using my car to save enough. I didn't tell them I was leaving and I moved out when they weren't home. I had collected the dog crap for a few weeks into a 5-gallon bucket. It was about 3/4 full. Before I left I gave it back to them through their front door mail slot, on their floor. So their mess, right? Lived in a dorm with 5 other guys in college and had to move out to the dorm across the quad building. It was a total of like 40 featuring move. Below us were the soccer players. They were a rowdy bunch and often partied until 3-4 am with loud music and drinking. Oftentimes we could feel the floor vibrate and we called safety services on them to get them to quiet down. Well, when we were moving they decided to egg our door. We called safety services who claimed they didn't have cameras up on that particular set of dorms. So using this information we egged them back and got safety service called on us. They said they knew we did it, they saw the footage, but if they punished us, they would also have to punish the soccer players. We also found out how to stop their music by trying to connect to their Bluetooth speaker. A few years ago, my parents were having an issue with the neighbor's dog crapping nearly exclusively in their lawn. My dad worked away from home a lot, and my mom is too timid to say anything, and just picks it up. She would complain about it all the time, but never actually say anything to the neighbors. One day, I had enough of her complaining to me, so I went over to the neighbors to discuss the issue. Their response was that they just couldn't keep the dog in the yard. I suggested a tie-out cable, and they said they'd look into it. No tie-out cable was purchased, and the dog kept crapping in my parents' yard, so I went back over to let them know it was still happening. The response this time was that they would start picking it up right away. A couple weeks later, I go over to mow my parents' lawn, and guess what I step in? I grabbed a plastic bag and picked up 9 piles of crap, tied it off, and left it at the neighbor's front door. Went about mowing the lawn, then went home. Mom calls me later that night and tells me the husband came over and bitched her out for the bag. Next week I go back to mow the lawn and there are 3 piles of crap 10 feet into my parents' property. I took a 9-iron and splattered them all over the side of the neighbor's house. Grabbed a lawn chair and a beer and waited in my parents' driveway until the neighbors came home with my crappy 9-iron. Husband sees it and storms over, cussing me out along the way. I told him that every time I find a pile in the yard, it's getting the same treatment. My parents don't own a dog, they shouldn't have to pick up dog crap. His wife is yelling at him in the background telling him it's not worth it and to get in the house. He calls me a little bee and walks away. Never had another problem with crap, just dirty looks. You should buy dog crap from people maybe once a month and just splatter it across his wall. My neighbor is going to war with me because I took issue with his dog. I love a behaved pooch, but I don't appreciate getting nose fricked by a dog while his owner just watches. So I asked him to leash his pup. He's done everything but use a leash, like building a barrier on the porch and training his dog. I don't have to shield my crotch when coming home anymore, so I don't care. My super sweet, but super gossipy downstairs neighbor asked how I was handling the obvious defiance and disrespect. I told her that I actually prefer this arrangement because I believe in doggy freedom, but the leash route is backed by law and feels less confrontational than have some freaking manners and train your dog. She must have let my feelings slip because he is now escalated to taking my parking spot seeing as it's one space closer. It's a small parking lot so it's for nothing else than to be petty. Thing is, I prefer this arrangement as well. I had been parking under a tree and dealing with a ton of bird crap. Space is limited so I've considered it my cross to bear rather than force a neighbor to deal with it. His dong move is saving me a weekly trip to the car wash. He's the best worst neighbor I've ever had. I can't wait to see how gets revenge on me next. Long story short, neighbor kept driving over our fence. My mum planted trees along whole east side by his property. This was 20 years ago. He no longer has any sunshine after 6 PM. Savage. Free shade. Nice. Not much of a war yet, but our neighbors shared the driveway when we moved in. But the entirety of the driveway is on our property. Well, we ended up catching them outside and told them we were putting up a fence and gate because of issues with the utility company. No worries, they were renters. Fence goes up. 2 weeks later, owner of neighbor's property shows up. He's maybe 80, gets out of a huge truck and proceeds to try and yank up the fence posts with his hands. Him sitting on my porch at the other end of the property, waiting on this guy to have a stroke. We've been finding warnings to remove the fence so I can use my driveway or else stuck to the fence. I will never understand sharing driveways for this reason alone. Back in like 2009 to 2010 I was at war with my downstairs neighbor. She would hit her ceiling with a broomstick, and I would point my bass speaker down toward the floor. I got pregnant with twins that were high risk, and got a temporary handicapped placard for parking closer. She borrowed one and took my spot. Few months go by of straight war, then I had my twins. I'll be damned if we didn't stop fricking with each other, and that woman was the only person to help me. We became best friends, and still are to this day. We still laugh at our silly war. Thank you, Heather. There's lots of background to this, but here is the final highlight of our experience. I woke up on morning AMD, headed out to my car to go to the store. My entire driver's side door and passenger door have deep scratches in them. Neighbor's craphead kids took gravel to my car. Call the cops. Kids admit to it. Neighbor says she'll pay the damage, then reneges when she finds out it's close to $3,000 damage. Our insurance covers it, but we civil sue them for the deduction we had to pay plus the cost of the security camera we installed after this event. Should have done that sooner as their kids broke many things of ours. They try to counter sue with a whole bunch of absolute bulls. We won, but they skipped town a month later. Dog kept chewing through old fence. Kept coming up with excuses why he wouldn't pay his half to replace the fence. We shouldn't have had to pay any of it since it would have been structurally fine if his dog didn't keep chewing holes in it and escaping into our backyard. We decided to start leaving our side gate open. The dog would chew through and then go wandering through the neighborhood. After the third pickup from the pound, he decided to buy scrap wood and patch up the holes. When we lived in the suburbs of Los Angeles, we had a trucker that lived next to us with his 2 kids. His son was a few years older than me and would constantly harass me to the point where I either wouldn't go outside without my older brothers or not at all. One Saturday around noon, I was inside playing NES while my dad and my brothers played basket in the driveway. My mom was at work. Our trucker neighbor came outside and cussed out my dad for playing basketball so loud so early. I mean, it was 12:30 on a Saturday afternoon. This is when I came outside. My dad told us to ignore him and I had now joined, went back to the game. A few minutes he came back outside with a switchblade knife, took the ball from my 14-year-old brother's hand, and popped it. It was at this point that my dad told us all to run over to the neighbor's house across the street and lock the door, which we did. I saw my dad duking it out with this beastly truck driver until the cops showed up. The trucker got 1 hit in on him and my dad got at least 3. The police arrested him based on what witnesses had said for assault with a deadly weapon, and we moved a month later across town, which was for the better. My dad can beat up your dad. Not me, but my grandpa really did go to war in Vietnam. He was a Marine, and his neighbor down the street, parents' house at the time as he was around 20, also got drafted with him. So he literally went to war with a neighbor. You sneaky, maliciously compliant bastard. I love you. Used to have a neighbor who would let her kids come upstairs and play on my apartment porch. It wasn't a big deal until they started leaving behind a mess. I asked her to keep them off my porch and she let me know they were allowed to play wherever they want. The trash and mess continued for a good 4 months. I came home exhausted one day and my porch was decorated in sidewalk chalk and finger paint. So I bring out the bucket of water and start cleaning just for her to yell at me from downstairs that I'm getting her porch wet and ruining her welcome mat, her all-weather mat. So I dump the bucket of water on my porch and it runs off onto her while she's bitching. She decides to checkmate me and starts smoking at the top of the stairs, letting her second-hand smoke waft freely into my apartment. I complain to management and they tell her about the laws of 25 feet away from any working entrance and she has to smoke in her house or off property. This bee takes out her bedroom screen and stands in her home, smoking out the window. Our apartments were set up in a way that allowed no ventilation in the front, so the smoke kept coming up to my apartment. That's when I discovered you can buy skunk spray online. Apparently hunters use it for something. I lined the tracks of her windows with it. She finally started leaving the property to smoke and her kids stopped visiting my porch. Apparently hunters use it for something. Covers up your human scent. When my parents' neighborhood was developed, our neighbor was friends with the developer and had his yard made a smaller size than ours because we share a drainage ditch in the middle and they didn't want to pay property taxes on the unusable space. Now we have new neighbors and they are constantly cutting our grass because they believe it's divided right down the middle. There are city tax records and property records that prove this, but they continue to do it. If I go to my parents to cut the grass, they will quick run out and do the perimeter of their yard before I get to it. I know it's petty and over 6 feet of grass, but it's the principle. Put up a cheap fence on the property line. Bing bang boom. Problem solved. This is so dumb. My neighbor got pissed that I hung up a bird feeder on my property, stating it attracted birds. I said, well, that's the point. To which he goes on a tirade about how he pays taxes and the birds don't, and that they were destroying his house, blah blah blah. This is all well and good until I just stopped responding to him and he brings up my ex-girlfriend by saying no wonder that bee moved out. It was an amicable breakup, so this was not an okay thing to say on many levels. I resisted the urge to punch him right then and there and calmly got into my car. drove to the nearest Lowe's, and bought a few more bird feeders to hang all around my property. I glared at him the whole time I was installing them. It's been 2 years, and he hasn't spoken to me since. I had never had a problem with him before that, and I rarely even converse with my neighbors because I normally keep to myself. Bloody birds, using all our public services and not paying any dang taxes. Redditors who have had neighbors from heck. What happened? This is a story about how local government can actually work for you. I live across the street from some major C. For some reason where my house ends is also the end of the residential zone. Directly across is zoned for business. The butthole who owns that business actually advertising on his website that he's a baron and his wife is a baroness. I like to call him Baron Von Fuckstick. Well, Frickstick leased some of his property to some fat asses who sell crappy low carb food. They'd been there for a couple of years when suddenly this massive food storage unit that looked like a train car appeared on their lot. And it was loud. Very loud. And it ran 24/7. During the day with all the other noises it wasn't so bad. But at night, it was the worst. Just about every 20 minutes this contraption would start up. I first went directly to Frickstick and complained. He directed me to the fat butthole who owns the low carb place. This guy couldn't give two fricks. I called the city. An inspector came out and did some testing. His results was that it wasn't actually loud enough for them to get into trouble. He did say he would check on their permits though. Nothing ever came about that. So, a long time goes by. Every night I seethe with anger and try to figure out ways to blow up this contraption or their place of business without being caught. I couldn't actually come up with anything. Then, they have the audacity to start marking parking places on the street and putting up signs that said they would tow. Not just during business hours, but all the time, whether they were there or not. I knew that this was illegal as the signs had no penal codes on them, etc. I asked around to people I knew, including cops, and was told I should contact my local city council member. I had never done this before. Supposedly politicians are there for their constituents, but I didn't actually believe it. I called. They were friendly. I explained the situation and for good measure I also mentioned the cold storage unit. They looked into it. Suddenly the tow signs were gone. They then let me know that there was going to be a hearing about the cold storage unit. Baron Von Fuckstick had already been fined and hadn't paid those fines. And if he didn't remove the dang thing a lien was to be placed on his property. I was ecstatic. Could the end be near? And then one day a large towing type vehicle came and yanked that piece of crap storage unit out of there. I now have peace and quiet again. I might have the best city council member in the United States. He's getting my vote for every election in the future. TLDR. Buttholes put in a giant cold storage unit across the street. My local assemblyman saved the day. He told his 12-year-old son to take care of the new neighbor's cats because they ventured into their yard a few times. End story warning. NSFL. One cat was shot over a dozen times with pellet gun, and the other was stabbed in the cheek so much that you could see its jaw and teeth. Both cats survived the attack, but ended up dying 2 weeks later in spite of all the medical care. Was living next to a foster home that had tons of boys living in it. Found out my mom had allergies to our cats Rat and Trixie, so we let them outside and everything was fine for like 6 months. I'd go outside every morning, call their names and feed them and spend some time with them before heading off to school. Then one day my cat Rat doesn't show up after calling for her, but Trixie does. I don't think too much of it, she's probably out doing cat things. I go to my aunt's house for the weekend to study with my cousin. Come back home and still no sign of Rat. I start calling her name around the neighborhood and asking around if anyone's seen her. Nope, no sign of her. Meanwhile, Trixie is suffering from seizures all of a sudden. We get them under control-ish and keep her inside to keep an eye on her because she was still like lethargic. Flash forward about 2 weeks later. I had basically got the thought maybe someone either ran Rat over or took a liking to her and kept her for themselves as she was a super smart and lovable cat. Cue knock on the door. My dad opens the door to a young boy holding a plastic bag with, you guessed it, Rat inside of it. He said she was in their hedges and he had a feeling he knew what happened to her. They had gotten a new foster kid who he said wasn't right in the head and had a gut feeling he had something to do with it. My dad thanks the kid, but goes over and talks to the head of the house about it because he also had noticed someone accidentally threw a fish over the fence a few days before and our dogs were almost gonna go for it. Apparently that kid had been causing a lot of trouble for them and was known to poison animals. Sad to say Trixie didn't make it out okay either. Bastard butt kid. I can sympathize. My cat was poisoned by a mysterious sadistic neighbor that poisoned neighborhood cats with antifreeze. Had some truly fricked up neighbors growing up in Russia. My building still has a few alcoholics who break booze bottles everywhere and pee inside the building. But one man who lived on my floor was infamous in our neighborhood. This guy lived with his mother, who, ironically, was our building's janitor, although she was nearly fired several times for shirking her duties. This woman made moonshine in her bathtub, which often stank up her neighbors' flats. Her kid began sampling the moonshine early on and was a full-blown alcoholic and juvenile delinquent by the age of 16. He soon moved on to H and began beating his mother for her tiny janitor's salary for drug money. One time he nearly put her in a coma, but she refused to press charges or kick him out. He broke into his neighbor's flat once for some drug money and went to jail for that for about 2 weeks. We decided to get an extra door for our side of the floor after that. The junkie was a metal grunge fan and wrote band names and Nirvana quotes all over the walls of our already dingy building. Like all the other alcoholics addicts, this guy pee absolutely everywhere in the building, even in his own flat. The downstairs neighbors actually had severe water damage because of his pee, and his flat was so foul that the next residents had to gut it completely. This junkie took it to the next level once and shat all over our floor's hallway when his mother wouldn't let him inside one night. My grandma and the building's other residents demanded for years that this individual be removed from the building. To no avail. His own mother, whom he physically abused, defended her precious son at every turn and refused to kick him out or even send him to rehab. Eventually, they fell behind on their utilities and had to relocate to a smaller flat elsewhere in town. They lived there for maybe a year until, rumor has it, that the junkie killed his mother. No one knows what actually happened, but the junkie was taken away by the cops when his mother died and was never seen or heard from again. Can I just say that your English, assuming Russian is your first language, is excellent. My husband's ex-wife. It had been 6 years since their divorce, and out of the blue, she called him up at his work. You know, just to chat, catch up, whatever. Fine. He isn't going to be a dong or anything, but he definitely doesn't want to talk to his ex. Then, she started showing up at the store, repeatedly, talked to everyone in his store, shared her story about the two of them to all his employees, claimed she was just showing up at the store to hang out with her new friends, asked his assistant manager out on a date, moved into the same apartment complex as us, started showing up at our door, left little notes and letters on his car, or on our door. We moved as soon as our lease was up. Looks like you've got a Tammy on your hands. A few years back our neighbors were getting kicked out because their mortgage was 8 months behind. How they even got a bank to loan them the money in the first place is still beyond me. The week before they left they ripped out everything to sell. Bathroom fixtures, oven, doors, paving stones. If it could be removed it was. When they finally moved out the only things they left behind were the dog, the cat, and the kid. Schizophrenic neighbor beat his girlfriend in the head with a baseball bat, only separated by one wall. Still didn't hear a thing. Just read about it in the newspaper. Awful crap. They fought a lot. Heard them yelling a few weeks before that and he said that's why you got fricked in this butt and she said I should never have given you no BJ interesting people. She was just freaking nuts. We built our houses around the same time. I was 10-12 in this situation, and it started out okay. Her husband and kids were awesome. Then things started to go wrong. It started with the fence. They wanted the paneling on their side. We said whatever. Having the supports or whatever on our side meant that my siblings and I could climb the fence. They wanted a more expensive fence. Whatever. We came in under budget with the house. They wanted the fence moved 1 meter onto our property. No freaking way. Man, did we pay for that. It only happened when mum and us were home, but what would happen is just little crap to start with. Like getting pebbles thrown over the fence when mum was in the garden, or she'd knock on the fence and pretend it wasn't her. It started escalating when she'd yell abuse at us. Everyone but my then stepdad, who of course didn't believe us. When we came home from school, we'd have to wait for the garage door to close fully before we could get out of the car, or she'd be out the front of our house screaming at us holding a broom or a rake. She was nuts. Finally my stepdad caught her when she was poking a hole in the fence so she could watch us, and was whispering abuse through the fence, thinking he was mum. She shat herself when he smacked the fence right over where she was making a hole. We got out of that house quick, which sucked because that was the house of our dreams. There was also missing pot plants, mysteriously pulled out plants, fronds missing from palm trees, and we could only guess how she ended up with a brand new palm tree. We lived in an old mill house, converted into about 3 stories of flats. We were in the loft attic conversion, and it easily my favorite flat in the world. The main door led straight outside so we didn't have to deal with a close, and the staircase was wrought iron. Downstairs we had the most ridiculously stereotyped Scottish junkies. They were shooting up constantly. They had 4 kids in a tiny 1-bedroom flat. They were abusive towards each other, constant shouting and screaming, banging on walls and stuff. They would wake us up at 3 AM having loud butt parties with their junkie friends. One night I finished a stock take at my work and didn't get home till 4 AM. I walked up the stairs, and as I passed their door I heard the worst noise in the world. As someone that was then training to be a teacher, this honestly had me crying like a baby. I heard a little girl screaming, literally freaking screaming for her dad to stop hurting her. She was crying and begging, and it tore me apart. I called the police, which we had done before for noise reasons, and told them that it sounded like a small child was being beaten and violated, and if they didn't get here within 10 minutes myself and my husband would deal with it. 3 cars and a riot van and a social worker showed up within 5 minutes, and I was waiting outside for them. The scum bastard was violating his 3-year-old daughter while his friends shot up and watched. The social worker let me hug the little girl while they got everyone situated. She was tiny, this little teeny bundle wrapped up in a blanket, sobbing in my lap. It ruined me. I couldn't sleep properly for months. They were arrested, the kids sent away, and I never knew what happened after that. They never came back. We left 6 months later. Jesus Christ. The rest of the stories in this feed have been mildly entertaining from a distance, but this has made me feel physically sick. As the auntie to a 3-year-old girl, my heart is in my throat. Honestly, all I can do is say well done for getting involved, as unfortunately so many people wouldn't bother XXX. A lady moved in and lied that her dog was a service dog because these apartments did not allow dogs or cats, but can't deny a service animal. This dog was no service dog. It didn't even have basic obedience training, and she would turn it loose all day long in the communal gated courtyard. Never cleaned up after it, and it was annoying as frick because it would playfully chase everyone and harass everyone because it was starved for attention. She got tons of complaints, but because she kept claiming it was a service animal, there was nothing to be done. She eventually got evicted after getting a second dog she let run feral and crap everywhere too, which she never cleaned, because obviously no one has 2 service animals that are literally never inside with the person. The landlord found out when she left she was also one of those hoarder people and left her apartment packed full of all kinds of crap and filth, including bags of clothes she had been stealing at night from those charity donation bins they set up in parking lots. She was just a vile individual. He stalked my roommate and I from the get-go. Day 1 when he first moved in and we met him, both of us had super bad vibes. No reason for it at the time, but our gut feeling said he was no good. And then literally for over an entire year, almost every time we went out the door he'd come out to our house to try to hang out. We couldn't even walk across the road to check our mail in peace. Then he'd walk up the road and stand in front of our house staring, or pace in front of it in the road. Then he started knocking on our door in the middle of the night. We never answered, as we in no way wanted him in our house ever, but especially not at midnight, and only knew it was him because we confronted him later and he admitted it. We'd go out together and get home and he'd be sitting in a chair in our yard like it was his house. And then he started showing up at stores and other places we were at in town and tried to follow us around there. It was freaking ridiculous, and we went through this crap for over a year. Got to the point that we hated even going outside and couldn't hang out in our own yard because we just felt like we were being watched and were just counting down the seconds until he popped up, because he always popped up. Complained to our landlord multiple times. He warned our neighbor multiple times. And it still continued and probably would still be continuing even now if the dude hadn't gotten behind in his rent and been kicked out, which happened late last year. He fricked up the house he was renting so much that it's been getting renovated for months. There were holes in the walls, the floors torn up, and according to the landlord hundreds of empty liquor bottles, burnt foil, used needles, and all sorts of crap up in the house. And we're supposed to be getting our next neighbor moving in sometime soon and we're just freaking dreading it so much. This guy was the worst, but previous to him we also had just a string of crap neighbors. We've both agreed that if this next one turns out to be just as crappy or worse, we're moving somewhere else. Just for future reference, someone stalking you is not a complaint to the landlord type scenario. That is a call the cops scenario. In this apartment my uncles lived in was connected to the neighbors by the bathroom, so they shared the bathroom. The neighbor lady was crazy and some mornings they would wake up and she would be in their apartment doing some creepy, weird crap. One morning they recall they woke up and she was standing over their bed, watching them sleep. That was the breaking point. They got the heck out. We lived in what seemed to be a mansion type of house, rented out to 3 different families. My family lived on the bottom floor, and a family of 6 lived above us. A mother, father, and 4 daughters aging from 4 to 13. Every morning they would stomp around the house like little elephants and make as much noise as possible to wake each other up so they could prepare for school. After they were ready, more often than not they would refuse to actually go out the door to go to school, screeching as loud as they can until the parents decided to let them stay home. Since we were on the bottom floor of the place, we had free reign of the backyard, whereas the other 2 families barely bothered to use it. They would frequently dump garbage and other random stuff off of a balcony into the yard and never bother cleaning it up, which we'd have to tend to daily since we had 2 dogs and an outdoor cat at the time. It was all a nightmare. When they were eventually kicked out by the landlord, she asked my mother to clean out the room's floor they were living in. She told me there was over 100 2-liter soda bottles scattered throughout their place, as well as mold growing in multiple rooms with foul odors everywhere. Though the oldest daughter was the same age as me and I had a huge crush on her, she was a very polite and clean girl, which is saying a lot considering what her family was like. We talked with her family about letting her move in with us while the rest of them left. I feel like it would have been better for everyone if she had stayed with us, but it never happened. I really hope she doesn't live with her disgusting family anymore. I truly felt horrible for her. Every morning they would stomp around the house like little elephants and make as much noise as possible to wake each other up so they could prepare for school. To be fair, it's just a house, so they were probably just living as normal people would. Converted houses don't have the nice noise dampening structures that most apartments would have between floors. Had this dude next door. Our bedrooms shared the same wall. He had this subwoofer that was louder than the horn of Hammerhand. Guy would listen to strictly heavy beats. I hope he's in a ditch somewhere, naked with no other earthly possessions except for that subwoofer. Back when I was a little kid, my next door neighbors did hard drugs and were always loud and had women over. One day they got raided by the SWAT, and as it turns out the squad leader was my hockey teammate's dad. He chuckled when he saw me through the window and chatted with my dad for a few. Was pretty cool to watch and see their guns and suits. 10/10 will remember for the rest of my life. My house got raided. Not exactly a raid, but they did barge in with guns drawn, but once my dad woke up and they realized everything was fine, they just left by police when I was about 6 and I slept through the whole thing somehow. I have super religious neighbors. They hang signs for the local church camp on their property act. They kept putting our garbage cans in our driveway. While it was stupid and annoying, it became more and more aggressive. They would trespass on my property and do damage to my house. But I could never catch them in the act. So I did the only thing a sane person would do. I put on my velvet ritual cloak and made a show of putting a salt circle around my property, chanting and carrying on. Never bothered me again. We have a beautiful pit bull boxer mix that was stolen out of our backyard by our neighbors and given to a shelter for pit bulls. We looked for our dog for weeks, all day and night. Just as we were about to give up, my mom checked local adoption ads and found our dog. The shelter she was given to was literally a block away from our house, and they informed us of the people who brought her there, who turned out to be our neighbors. So we got our dog back and the neighbors continued to try to get our dog taken away from us by calling the police for animal abuse multiple times, even when we were playing with her in our own backyard and very obviously loved her. What first tipped you off that your neighbor was weird, crazy, not right? When his daughter was screaming on their front lawn that he was abusive, we called the cops. They continued to be a delight to live next to until we, thankfully, moved a year later. There are so many more stories to this I can sense. I was out front working on something and had my schnauzer with me. He was on a long lead that was tied off and could not reach the sidewalk. The crazy old guy a few houses down decided to come over to introduce himself. At this point we had lived here for over a year and he never made any attempt to say hello. He would just glare at us whenever we passed his house. He showed up carrying a 4 feet long 1 inches rod and announced he brought it in case he needed to hit my dog. Well, what a coincidence. I just bought a gun just in case you hit my dog. When I was first moving into my house, a couple neighbors came over to introduce themselves. Regular old suburban dudes with their kids. Great guys. I ask about the neighborhood and crap like that. They both kind of glance across the street. You met Ed yet? Nah, we just got here. Yeah, nice guy. Divorced. Travels a lot. His door is always open though. I was like, AW, how nice. What a wonderful place to have bought my family's first home. Yep, not a euphemism. Ed leaves, sometimes for a week at a time. Front door just blowing in the wind. Wide the frick open. When he is home the door is also open. His car is parked half in the front yard, and he is rocking out to Bon Jovi and other 80s type stuff. Ed is probably living the dream on some level, not a care in the world, but it is a little odd to behold. Ed sounds like future me. He kept 9 Rottweilers in his 1-bedroom, 3rd floor flat. He took them for walks attached to a stolen supermarket trolley. Despite this he never flooded the place, or set fire to it, so still counts as one of our best neighbors. She went batshit crazy on us when another neighbor's trash spilled out into the cul-de-sac. Not even our trash. Lady, chill the frick out. Well, if you weren't all messy heathens. When she called the cops for a noise complaint at about 9:30 p.m. on a Friday night, they showed up, knocked on the door and looked around confused and half embarrassed. Cops, we're here about a noise complaint. Were you, having a party before or something? Us. Well, we're playing board games and have some music on. Cops, music, dongs his head as if listening carefully. I'm okay. Well, keeping it down I guess. This became a semi-regular thing, and at some point the cops stopped showing up. She then switched to calling our landlord anytime we were hanging out in our living room, existing at normal volume levels after 8 p.m. Landlord was like your neighbor. I think she's maybe crazy. Yes she was. At a house I used to live at, a lady and her handicapped husband lived across from our driveway. They were about in their late 70s in about 1994 or so. I bought my wife a new Mitsubishi Eclipse and the lady came over and screamed at me for about 20 minutes for buying a Jap car. Then she really lost her crap when I bought a Mazda pickup truck. I planted a tomato garden and she came over to berate me because while I was gone for a long weekend some overripe tomatoes fell to the ground and were wasted. And she informed me that from now on she would inspect my garden daily to ensure there was no waste. Thinking about it for a while, it became obvious that this couple grew up during the Depression and her husband was a disabled World War II veteran. She hated the Japanese and she despised any sort of perceived waste of food. I told her she could take as many tomatoes as they needed, and after that she pretty much left me alone. The result of years of terror, no doubt. When I found out he murdered his wife, stabbed her 13 times apparently, did his time, then was my neighbor. Really quite guy. Friendly. But that's just it, something you hear and don't forget about. Oh my lord, 13 times is a rage kill. I wonder what caused him to snap, and also what allowed him out of prison later on. What a timely post. A new person moved into the apartment next to me last weekend and has been making non-stop noise ever since, which is understandable having just moved, but it goes on almost 24/7. I'm a bad sleeper and awake frequently at 2, 3, 4 am and there is loud banging and crashing every night. Well, last night, at 2:50 am he went out on his balcony and just shouted nonsense and said mother sucker about 50 times. so I suspect he is not right in the head. Time will tell. The last BF1 update has not been well received. He let me swim in his pool when I was a teenager but would stare at me on his deck the whole time. 3 years later he got caught with child pee all over his computer. Wow, I'm sorry. Blaring Mexican music at 4 AM while dancing by herself outside by the fire pit. She's a nice old lady, but she's a little crazy. That's the best kind of nice old lady to be. You should talk to her. Maybe she'll have some quest to send you on after an enlightening speech. This isn't super extreme, but we had neighbors who would let their dog out off the leash and then be shocked when he didn't come back. We'd hear them screaming Silas all the freaking time. I guess they were a little weird and definitely stupid. Sitting outside one day with my boyfriend and my neighbor walks over with his bike and starts showing it off, pointing out the neon colors, talking about how fast he can ride it down the sidewalk, etc. He then proceeded to get on the bike and show us that he can do a wheelie. This neighbor is a 30-something-year-old grown man with no intellectual disabilities, just a lot of drug use. Well, I mean, wheelies are pretty impressive. Mild, but mows his lawn constantly. Like, he's out every day with his lawnmower trimming the grass, and gives me dirty looks when I'll let mine get too long compared to his. I haven't decided if he hates his family or just loves lawn maintenance. My neighbor mows his lawn probably 3 to 4 times a week, and twice per mow. He will now it once one direction and again the other direction to make a checkered pattern. I don't ever get dirty looks, but he always signals me to slow down as I pass, no matter what speed I'm going. Interesting guy. Oh man, I grew up across the street from a legitimate crazy lady. Some of the things she has done. Called the cops on my dad for mowing her waist-high lawn. She came home midway through the mowing and flipped crap after the officer heard her side and went to talk to my dad. They told him that she claimed my parents sneak into her house at night to tie bows in her shoes and leave dimes around the house to assert dominance. They let my dad off with a warning. Threw dog crap into the street and in the general direction of neighbors. Rattled the doorknob of her next door neighbors at 3 AM. With a dead look in her eyes. Regularly turned away from neighbors while walking on opposite sides of the street to wave at the sky. Flashed my old man neighbor. He served as a medic in World War II and told my dad that it was the most disgusting thing he'd ever seen. Regularly yelled at the neighborhood preteen girl, calling her a SW, and to enjoy letting the boys play with her. At first it was funny, but over time I just started to feel really bad for her. When she first moved in, when I was 9 or so, she was a very nice lady, but she must have stopped taking her meds or something. Upvoting because it was the most disgusting thing he'd ever seen. A combo of 2 things. 1. Hearing the mom and daughter get into full-on yelling matches with each other that could be heard inside of my own house, with their and our windows closed. 2. Their collection of old bus lawnmowers in the backyard that I never saw them use, or even touch. Extra credit. A friend of my dad went over to their house once to ask them about possibly using one of the lawnmowers. He looked in the window and saw a classic case of hoarding. He then had the massive balls to walk into the house. He said it was exactly like what you see on TV. Massive stacks of random crap. Little pathways from one room to another. Their dog had made a nest somewhere in the house. The fridge was apparently a disaster, with old, rotten, moldy food crammed into every shelf. It was a crazy breach of privacy, but interesting to hear the results when he came back. We knew they were bad. No dad, mother didn't have clue, and 2 teens, boy and girl, running wild. We only had a couple months left on our lease, so we stayed. Then one day the cops show up. 8 cars, a van and one of those command trucks. They went in and out of the house from about 9 AM till dark. It was on the news. Mom and kids arrested, weed and crack found. The worst was the guns. These kids had nearly 200 guns, rifles and pistols, all stolen. Some had been used in crimes. Their landlord emptied the house the next day and we never saw them again. Whoa. It's our superintendent, and when I caught him peering into my bathroom window while I was cleaning the tub was basically the deciding factor. Also, my dog doesn't like him. Trust your dog. Grew up next door to a guy who was breastfed until he was 6 or 7. Parents slept in separate beds, then eventually separate rooms. He often shared the same bed with his mother until he was 11 or 12. He is all kinds of fricked up now. I had a neighbor that would inject drugs into her boobs while she was pregnant. It made her skin look half rotten. It was covered with these strange black bumps. She liked showing her cleavage, so it wasn't hard to find out. I feel like she isn't fit for motherhood. I'm not sure if this constitutes weird crazy not right, but he had this big lifted truck and for no reason he would just rev the engine every day. He would sit in his truck and just rev the engine. One night he got into a fight with his girlfriend and he screamed at her and got in the truck, got in it and just revved the engine. If you listen real hard you still faintly hear his sobs over the roar of the engine. Buddy was tipped off by having the tip of a butt hit his mouth. Friend of mine told me this story. He moved into a basement apartment. Like a normal decent person went upstairs to introduce himself to the neighbor. When he opened the door after saying hello and all that good stuff, neighbor offered my buddy a sip of Pepsi. He was holding a 2-liter bottle. Kinda nice, kinda odd, but whatever. My buddy was actually thirsty so he accepted and took a sip, but something hit his lip and he made a face. And the neighbor goes, "Oh, did you get a butt?" He went on to explain how he liked to drink Pepsi with cigarette butts in them. Something about the flavor or some crap. All while my friend is just standing there with a horrified look on his face. Like, WTF is that? You think someone else would enjoy that crap and just offer it to them? Gross. I've yet to meet them, and they seem nice enough. Except for the fact that my next door neighbors in my new apartment leave their door open almost all of the time, and their pad is full of grotesque, macabre dolls hanging by their necks all around the apartment. That sounds like a fair way to get good airflow with no fear of burglary. 1. He keeps a telescope mounted on a tripod aimed at our bedroom window from his bedroom window. There's a nightlight near the telescope, so we can see movement, but it's hard to tell what he's really up to. 2. He has 7 sets of wind chimes hanging on the porch, all tuned in different keys. Thus, they create an annoying cacophonic din on windy nights. That's privacy invasion. I'd photograph it and turn it into police that could order a cease and desist. When I was younger, my neighbor had supposedly set up a tent in his house and wanted me to come over and play. I was like 8 years old at the time. Just WTF. I am so glad you didn't go inside that house. I like to sit in my car in my driveway for a while after I get home, and I noticed that cars would pull up to my neighbor's house and he would walk out and they would exchange things through the window, then the car would drive off. I assumed they were selling drugs. I also noticed that all the guys who'd come over were all bald and tatted, so I made the assumption that they were white supremacists. A few weeks ago the D came and busted them for drugs, and turns out they're part of a prolific white supremacist group after all. Meanwhile, your neighbor is posting here. She gets home from work and just sits in the car. I don't get it. She has a nice house, huge TV, decent yard, but nope. She wants to sit in her car. Summoned us over to the fence to pet a baby raccoon he had just found, then made us promise not to tell our parents. Later they assured us that the raccoon was tame. They knew this for certain. See, because they slept with it every night. Constructed a cage taller than their actual house with plans to fill it with feral cats. No dividers or separate cells, just a giant wire box, before the city made them take it down. Not only was it 4 kinds of illegal, but of all the places, they built it right up against the line of our property where we kids would play on our playground. Blamed the failure of their cat palace on us. Put a letter in the mailbox of everyone in our neighborhood warning them to keep their pets indoors because my parents were catching and killing people's cats. Beat his wife with a vacuum cleaner. Got into a fist fight with the cops. Jumped into his car and tore off in the shortest car chase ever as the cops shot out his tires before he got a few meters down the street. Oh boy, I could go on. These guys were a train wreck. Beat his wife with a vacuum cleaner. Somehow, I find this tidbit to be the most absurd of all the things to abuse someone with. When I figured out he throws imaginary parties, he sets up chairs and starts a fire in his pit and blasts his radio. It took a little while to realize he wasn't on a Bluetooth and was actually talking to his imaginary guests. Go be his friend. My neighbor is a prostitute. She dressing like a prostitute and receiving multiple men a day at her apartment tipped me off. This is pretty much beyond reasonable doubt. If you saw her, you'd know what I mean. She's a nice lady, though. I often dress like a prostitute and receive multiple men a day at my apartment, but I'm just a S. Probably when he came over drunk and introduced himself to me and my mom. We were on our porch smoking a cigarette and my at the time 3-year-old was running around the porch playing. He came up and we got to small talking and asked what there was to do for fun here since we just moved here. His response, creepy chuckle, well I masturbate a lot and smear crap on my walls. I mean, it's good to have honest neighbors. 5-year-old me was running around the apartment having fun like 5-year-olds do when we got a call on the house phone and I picked up to hear my downstairs neighbor telling me he's going to break my legs. When we moved in next to them in North Carolina mid-90s, the wife of an older couple came over and asked us if we wanted a ride to church that Sunday. My parents had already scoped it out and found the local Catholic church. So my mom tells this to the woman who then says to mom, "Oh honey, you don't want those 2 little boys going to heck, do you? We'll pray for you." The husband would go out into the yard at 5:30 in the morning, hack up disgusting phlegm, and let out their little dog. Rolly, do your business. Rolly intense coughing, good dog. Good times. At the time, I was 20 and had just moved into an apartment complex on the 2nd story floor. The neighbor in question was somewhere in his 40s, living alone on the 1st floor. This was also about 2 years ago, but I still remember that after being there for only the first 2 days, my downstairs neighbor was starting to make plans with me, involving him, his 12-year-old daughter, whom he had partial custody of on the weekends, and myself, suggesting things like we could all go to the zoo, movies, dinner outings, and immediately started talking to me about having me to his place and following me into mine because, in his words, it was a gentlemanly thing to do and to make sure I was safe. Despite the fact we lived a few feet apart, he quickly confessed to feeling an infatuation, sexual tension with me. I started feeling as though he was just trying to find a replacement mom for his kid and start the relationship with me out of severe neediness, especially due to hearing he had gone through a terrible divorce, which is what led him to live in the apartment complex to begin with. Needless to say, I confronted the landlord about everything that was going on, and all she said was to ignore him, after stating that was just who he was. So, I avoided him at all costs for the remainder of my stay, but eventually left due to financial issues, despite him offering to help pay. TLDR. Neighbor in his 40s wanted a relationship with 20-year-old me, and that he already pictured a life together after only knowing me for 2 days. Oh god, I feel sorry for him and you. When she screamed at our dogs over our shared back fence, screamed, "You stop that barking right now." It was Sunday afternoon of a holiday weekend, and my in-laws were in town, and we were sitting outside on our deck just drinking a glass of wine and relaxing. Our 2 dogs were playing tug of war with a rope, and the younger one started barking. He had been barking for maybe 30 seconds, a minute. She started screaming over the fence, so of course the dog got very excited and started running around like a maniac until we could get him inside. I honestly don't think she realized we were in the yard with the dogs. So then my husband went over to the fence to apologize and she went on a rant about how the dogs are always out here barking. False. They live inside and we bring them in if they start barking at all when we are home and they're outside. Since these people, my husband and I, who had bought our home almost a year prior and whom she had met before, moved in, then she threatened to sue us. Later we went to apologize to our other neighbors about our dogs barking, since we figured maybe they barked a lot more than we realized when we weren't home, and maybe despite them being inside the house it was bothering people. Every other neighbor said they never noticed it. One of our neighbors then let us know they were afraid of this lady because she's been known to file complaints with the city on pretty much anyone who annoyed her, going as far to drive one woman out of the neighborhood altogether. Batty old woman. I can't stand her. Haven't seen or heard anything from her at all in the year since this incident happened. We heard him in having a loud argument with someone. Didn't take long to realize the other voice was his as well. So we listened to this guy have his argument for a while. Then the make-up sex started. Guy moved in next door, and we started trying to be neighborly. He was kinda quiet and reserved, so we kinda decided to not bother him. Then he pulled out a 9mm and started shooting at a makeshift target in his backyard. Thankfully not pointed at our house, but pointed right at a small lake maybe 100 yards away behind our houses and near other residences that kids were swimming in, unbeknownst to him. That was a very uncomfortable afternoon, and a long conversation with the police as a witness. Thankfully, no one was injured, and nothing seemed to have been hit, but he just got a slap on the wrist, a warning from the police, who told us that he came from Poland and was very clearly a bit drunk, and was just unaware that there could be issues involved with firing his gun off in the direction of residences. Somehow, that wasn't very comforting, especially knowing the neighbors that lived back they had met with him the day before and had gotten into a fight with him over some harebrained scheme he had to block off their road as some sort of match. I've told this story on another thread before, but I'll tell it again. I was about 6 years old and lived in an apartment with my parents. We had new neighbors that had just moved in, and they seemed very nice. The man was a university lecturer. 2 weeks later we smell something burning and my dad notices copious amounts of smoke coming out of their lounge window. He of course gets worried and goes to investigate. Turns out they wanted to do some cooking over an open fire, but seeing as we live in an apartment block they decided to just make a fire in the middle of their wooden dining room table and cook on it. May I just repeat again that this guy was a university lecturer. People with advanced degrees are often very common sense challenged, with one in particular that I know. I'm amazed she's managed to live to a ripe old age instead of dying horrifically in a freak accident of her own making. Me in my friend's house 4 o'clock in the morning. Me and a friend sitting playing Rocket League. Bang, bang. A random huge Russian man with a huge drunk German shepherd at the door. Call cops and spend an hour trying to tell him that it isn't us that are being loud. It's the other names across the street. The other names are outside screaming at each other at least twice a week. He was drunk and couldn't understand us. After an hour he finally went home. We returned to Rocket League and the police arrive at 5:55. Took 2 hours for the frickhead police to get here. The station is 30 seconds away. I was living in a small apartment complex with only 6 units. 3 on top, 3 on bottom. My upstairs neighbor slowly went crazy over the course of a few weeks, probably due to drugs. He'd always been a stoner, but I guess he had started experimenting and it really screwed him up. The first sign was when my boyfriend and I were coming home late one night and the neighbor, I'll call him Jake, was outside looking worried. But when we asked him what was up, he said he heard screaming and crying coming from the unit next to us. There were 2 kids and their parents who lived there, but all the lights were out and it was obvious everyone was asleep. We thought maybe the parents had been fighting earlier and Jake was being paranoid, so we said goodnight and told him not to worry. It only escalated from there. He became obsessed with this family. His drug-scorched mind convinced him that the mom was abusing the children, and he even accused her of molesting them. This being a small complex, everybody knew everybody and helped care for each other's kids, so they all knew this was total crap. The mother was understandably furious and hurt by his accusations, as they had been close when he was sober. She didn't blame him though. She kept trying to tell him to stop with the drugs and that they were screwing him up. His fixation on this family drove him to do some weird things. He drew weird chalk circles around their front door and even tried to barricade them inside with some porch furniture. I saw him multiple times hiding behind the railing upstairs for no apparent reason and heard all kinds of crashing and muttering at all hours of the night. When Jake started trying to talk to the kids about his weird accusations, his whole face painted red for whatever reason. The mom snapped. She yelled at him to stay away from her children and to get help, and he yelled back that she was an evil woman hurting her family. She ultimately decided to call the police, but cried the entire time they questioned her. She was crying that she had lost both a friend and a neighbor to whatever awful substances he had put in his body. I'm not sure what happened to Jake. Not even once. When the first time I saw them after they moved in, he was screaming at his wife for letting the dogs out and kicking the puppy that had gotten out. Fast forward to 5 months later when their 5 kids have been taken away from them by Child Protective. That man should burn in Satan's fiery butthole. I lived in an apartment building where my front door was next to my bedroom. I was alone in bed sleeping. My so had a party and I knew there would be some drinking involved. I woke up from heavily snoring. Like really loud. I remember thinking my so drank way too much and I reached over to give a push. Nobody there. I thought maybe my so was drunk, crashed in the hallway. Lights on. Nobody there. The sound came from the front door, so then of course I thought my so would have been so drunk that the key was difficult and fell asleep right trying to get in. I still don't know why I thought all this because my so doesn't drink a lot and isn't snoring either. So I opened my front door and a horrible smell was up in my nose immediately. Old beer, old pee, old cigarettes and old puke. It was so bad I gagged. I see only the feet and the legs of a person and I knew this wasn't my so. At this point I was really worried because this person was blocking my door and my so would come home at some point. So I tried calling and heard the phone ringing in the living room. I then called the police. I told them a hobo was sleeping in front of my door and was snoring so hard I couldn't sleep. Some time later I hear the police trying to wake the person and at some point the person became really angry. I heard a lot of shouting and noises and then it became very still. Some time later my doorbell rang and I was scared at that point, but a voice shouted they were police. They told me with a big smile, hey, that hobo sleeping here was actually a woman and she is your new neighbor. She is very well known by the police, so good luck with that. We saw a lot of her, mostly unconscious. That stank was her normal smell and she had an adult son living with her who was the same. Every morning when I went to work they were coming home from the supermarket with a shopping cart filled with the cheapest beer. But they never harassed us or talked to us. He refuses to let his wife speak to anyone. She tried to wave to someone down the street and he grabbed her arm to stop her. He's called the police at least 40 times on most of the neighborhood, and he even tried to file a restraining order on us, despite him trying to attack my dad with a tire iron and NBSP. Also 2 years ago for Halloween his decoration was a fake grave in his yard with our family name on it. High density big city residents. What's the craziest thing you've seen through someone else's windows? NSW. I was staying at my father-in-law's condo during a vacation with my wife. There's this annoying middle-aged guy that loves to talk to anyone who comes down to the pool. So we were at the pool talking to him and he pulls out this big toy gun. We're like, what's that for? And he explained that it shot out salt and he used it to kill flies. That's pretty cool, I admit. We let him shoot it at us to feel how much force it had, and it wasn't much at all, but I imagine those little grains of salt shred bug wings. Anyway, he eventually went back inside and so did we. Then we came back out later in the night to BBQ. He was in his home and walking around naked. Okay, no biggie. Just a naked chubby middle-aged guy. Not the worst thing I've seen in my life. What made this crap weird is that he walked up to one of his end tables, played with his junk for a second, then reached down and grabbed the salt gun, and proceeded to shoot himself in the twig and berries with it for like 2 minutes non-stop. Then headed back into the parts of the house that weren't visible. TLDR. Neighbor showed us his salt gun fly swatter thing, and then later on that night used it to shoot himself in the balls over and over for roughly 2 minutes straight. Makes sense. You can salt your meat if you want to store it for a long time and not use it. Don't live in a big city, but this one person in my city has a cardboard cutout of the My Pillow guy in every window of their house. Best comment in this thread. Finally not someone being naked. The replies in this thread reminded me of a truism I heard once that I think checks out. If you stand naked outside your front door and your neighbors can't see you, that's rural. If you stand naked outside your front door and your neighbors call the cops, that's suburban. If you stand naked outside your front door and your neighbors ignore you, that's urban. If you stand naked outside your front door and your neighbors can't see you, that's rural. If you stand naked outside your front door and your neighbors call the cops, that's suburban. If you stand naked outside your front door and your neighbors ignore you, that's urban. And if the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore. I once saw a person in full Spider-Man costume just watching TV in their apartment, mask and all, like all night long. This continued each night for all 3 nights I was in the city. It made me believe that Spider-Man is real, but that he doesn't really have much to do besides watch TV. Peter B. Parker. Definitely the guy that uses his large screen TV to masturbate every night with his curtains wide open. His pee interests are pretty bland. Just your standard pee start getting pounded by a dude whose face you never see. I'd have to actively try not to see this. That's how easy it is to see. Well, it's 10 PM. Better not look out the window cause then we'll see neighbor man getting his wank on. Get a laser pointer and shoot it at his screen until he closes his curtains. Lived in this one complex growing up. Kinda place where we were section 8 housing, but right across the street were high-end apartments and I think condos. I could see into the kitchen of a bit of a foodie. This was 88, 89 so that term didn't exist yet. I was at the time learning to cook myself so this was like a live cooking show every night. Then there was what I know was a mock turtle soup recipe, but at the time it was like I was watching someone just do obscene things to a few calf heads. Looked over and they were splitting them to get the brains out, nailing tongues to a board and peeling them. Gore all over the kitchen. I feel like this should get more attention than it has been. Split cow heads are a crazy butt thing to see regardless of context. Sort of the reverse for me. Miso can't keep her cloths on, and she doesn't care about the blinds. Completely assured no one is looking, till one day our neighbor's blinds fell down. There he was, dong in hand, red as a beet and staring right at us. Record scratch. In Toronto, I rented the top floor of a house. The house behind us was set back from the street, and the houses on either side were almost in front of it, so you could barely see it from the street. They had planted tall bushes and trees so you couldn't see the hidden house, but we could. From our fire escape balcony, we almost never saw who lived there. I was having a dart up on the fire escape one morning, and I see their back door open up and a guy in his early to mid 40s come out in a bathrobe. He lights a dart as well. We give each other a little open palm wave and nod. A minute later, a black woman comes out in a bathrobe, looking to be naked underneath, and she takes a drag off his cigarette. Then another woman, a white woman, comes out, also in a bathrobe and admonishes the first two for smoking. The guy puts it out and they all go back inside. A couple of months later I noticed the guy, the two women and 4 kids at the local park. 2 white kids, 2 mixed ethnicity kids, all around the same age. That dude was living large on the down low. If this thread's taught me anything, it's that I need to move to Toronto, apparently. When I was in college, our dorms were basically high-rise apartments. One night I was looking out the window, contemplating life, when I saw a man and woman having sex in a building across the street, like perfect view of everything. Their bed was directly in front of the window. I called my roommates over and we kinda just watched for a minute. Then we opened our window and started cheering them on. The guy glanced over, grinned and kept going. We were basically watching Liv pee. How close are your two places to be able to see the guy grin lol? When I was a teenager, a friend and I thought it would be hilarious to order pizza to the house across the street and watch the confusion unfold. The confusion was anticlimactic, as you can imagine, but the aftermath was crazy. We could see right into their living room and the dad husband went freaking crazy and started screaming and throwing crap and then started actually punching holes in the wall and ripping apart said wall once the hole was started. We didn't do the pizza thing again. Oh, so that little sucker was you. TLDR. This kid was spinning the crap out of himself. I was smoking on a balcony with some friends when we saw something moving in someone's window. It was someone's living room and some kid, maybe 4 years old, had his arms out airplane style. He was spinning around the room so goddamn hard. He kept popping in and out of view, and genuinely lasted longer than anyone expected. I don't know how, but he must have been going for a full 5 minutes. Bouncing off his couch every so often. By the end we were cheering him on. Thanks, I needed that after reading some of these posts. 6 AM. Went on my balcony to get some fresh air. Saw the MILF of my neighborhood cooking while completely naked. That's it. I wish I was attractive enough to get away with this. At my old apartment when few people were home, I'd hardly wear clothes, and I love having windows open at my current one, but I gotta be careful not to flash anybody lol. Hot naked Asian we called her. Tried not to look, which wasn't too difficult as she was a floor up, but with a raised kitchen and quite tall herself. Then one day I came into my room and my lesbian friend was looking sheepish. I knew exactly what she'd done. She'd been ogling and had gotten caught in the act. HNA shut her blinds from then on. Yell at your lesbian for me for ruining HNA. I live in downtown Toronto, and I've seen two people freaking out of a window. As in, the dude was inside, the girl's front half was out the window, and they were going at it. It was pretty freaking funny. Fun fact that's tenuously related to this, there's a hotel in Montreal that looks over the football stadium. If you're staying in a suite that overlooks the field when they have a televised game, you have to sign a waiver promising you won't be up to anything with your windows open, since they've had multiple people put on a show for the camera. An incredibly hot woman sunbathing topless on a rooftop in the middle of the day, but this roof wasn't taller than its adjacent buildings. Oh no, this was like a 10-story building surrounded on all four sides by massive high-rises. All told, she was flashing them out to maybe 50 floors worth of office drones, many of whom I'm sure were pressed to the window glass. She probably reduced nationwide GDP for the day by at least a cool million. I'm starting to think she was a model hired by the apartment owner in order to get more interest in the apartment so that they could raise rent prices. Was staying over at a friend's place in Edinburgh, was on a pull-out sofa. They didn't have curtains in the front room, just blinds, and a balcony beyond that. The railing was all glass. The blinds didn't come down all the way, so I could look out to the flats across the way from where I was laying. Watched a couple have a roaring argument, and then saw him deck her. Woke up my friend and called the police. I had to get on a train in just a few hours, so they said I should go back to sleep and they'd keep watch on the couple flat until the police came. Not even through the window, but when I was at Penn State I saw a couple fricking on the balcony at about 3 AM or so. That probably doesn't count though, because college, in Denver, across from where I work, is an apartment building. It is well known throughout my office that there is a man one floor down that spends roughly 4 hours every day playing Destiny 2, while in his underwear. Recently saw him playing Sekiro naked, and people were more interested in his game change than they were in his lack of whitey tighties. He didn't seem to enjoy it much, because he was back on Destiny within the hour according to my coworker. I need to close my curtains. Not exactly windows, but there is a guy who sunbathes across from our office, 20-something stories up, on his porch, in the nude. Every now and then in the summer the call will go out. Naked guy is out again. We will all take a quick look to confirm. Yep, he still doesn't know we can see him. The office has tinted windows. From outside they look opaque. He knows. Not that crazy, but my living room window faces directly at my neighbor's living room window. Yesterday, they had their parents over and were playing cards. The dad was sitting on a yoga ball and busted butt right when I happened to glance over, so I saw the whole thing. Got a good chuckle out of that. My wife once saw our smoking hot, blonde neighbor getting dressed in front of her apartment window. Full nudity. She told me to go take a look, but I was too late. Never did get to see those tea. She just wanted to see how fast you would come running so as to determine how silently mad at you to be for what length of time. I live in NYC. In my first apartment, my guy bedroom window was right up against my neighbor's girl bedroom window. Our windows were 3 feet apart. Neither of us had blinds or curtains. We kinda just lived peacefully, ignoring each other, changing, watching Netflix, listening to music. We were both single, and on more than one occasion, we both had guests over at the same time. We only finally met when we were both moving out on the same day. We got a drink together and laughed about all the shenanigans we had in front of each other. Never learned each other's names. Was the best neighbor I ever had. I once worked with a guy for 3 years and never learned his name. Best friend I ever had. We still never talk sometimes. I lived in a big city and made friends with a few guys who lived across the alley from me. They were out drinking on the deck one night when I got home and they invited me over. So we're drinking and I need to take a pee. Walk back to the bathroom and glance out the window to see a fire on a deck. Then I realize it's my freaking deck that is on fire. Barge in on my roommate who is asleep at this point. Dude put his cigarette out into a cardboard box. It caught fire, burned through our deck and then onto the neighbors below. Ducking idiot. I bet you said forking shirt balls. My deck is on fire. Saw a crazy guy yelling at UPS truck accusing it of being a Decepticon, telling it to show itself and transform. He was literally punching and kicking it. It was 9 AM. I used to live in an apartment building in the East Village in New York. I was on the back of the building, which faced two other buildings, essentially forming a square behind my building. We used to call this space the shaft. Across the shaft from me there was a girl around my age, at the time, 20 something, who would never wear clothes, and she kept her curtains open all the time. I'd wake up and look out the window facing the shaft and see her cooking an omelette, fully naked. Sometimes before bed she'd do stretches in her room, naked. In the morning she'd get dressed for work with the blinds fully open. I swear I saw her boobs more frequently than my girlfriends. One night I came back from the bars and looked across the shaft and saw that she wasn't alone. This was weird because despite her nakedness I rarely saw her with anyone else. She didn't have a boyfriend or anything. She was in her room with 3 other people, 2 guys and a girl, and they were all naked too. They weren't having sex or anything, but they were all kind of in a pile on the bed, naked together. I still wonder what her deal was. Was she a nudist or something? In any case, that's the weirdest thing I've seen through someone else's windows. When I was 13 I saw my neighbor's boobs. That was cool. When I was around the same age, I lived in a big apartment complex, and the backs of the units had bedroom windows and multi-tiered staircases that ran the length of the buildings on each floor. Well, this one lady always snuck a guy in her window this way and would greet him wearing topless lingerie, so I got to see boobs like twice a week. It was the best. I had just moved into a garden apartment in the LA area. Across the way was a small cluster of houses. The people who lived there seemed to all know each other. They would hang out on the porch together, blasting music, laughing, drinking and smoking. I would watch them from my living room window. They were my age, 20 something, but I didn't know them and didn't feel confident introducing myself. Then one day they were all assembled on the porch, gathered around a bucket. They had built some kind of contraption and were laughing really loud. Clouds of smoke billowed up. I could smell it from inside my place. I had no idea WTF they were doing. After weeks of watching these weirdos I decided this was as good a time as any to figure out WTH they were up to. I crossed the lot and introduced myself. Turns out they had built a massively huge gravity bong. I had never seen one before. They offered. I accepted. I nearly choked from the massive column of smoke. They gave me beer. I gave them snacks. These people became my best friends. We had many adventures together over the next few years. The stuff of legend. I loved them. 30 years later, we still connect via FB. So if you have weird neighbors, I say go meet them. You might be surprised. My neighbors from across the street are the worst TBH. This girl hosts orgy parties that we can hear from across the street. One day we were coming home at around 10 PM. She though it was someone else parking in front of her house and came to the door completely naked, and we could see at least 3 of our neighbors were in there with her, along with some people we didn't know. The worst though was catching her kids, aged 3 and 4, mimicking sex on the patio of their house, and they did it like real pros. I suppose they saw their mom do it during her orgy parties. For your information, the neighbors constantly call CPS on her. We don't sit idle. Jesus Christ. Not even super high density. Neighbor behind me in new build homes. Backyards are small so his back windows are about 20 yards from mine. My house was finished first. I watched theirs be built, met them as they would visit, talked to them and learned. Super religious couple who were engaged. They get the house on X day, but won't be married till the weekend after, so they won't take possession till they are man and wife. That's really all you need to know where I'm going with this. Oh, and I guess you should know, they never seem to understand the reason to get curtains. I swear to God I saw them frick, try to frick, learn how to frick, fail at fricking, occasionally get fricking right and one time do anal. Over the course of their first 2 months, I mainly thought it was funny and just ignored it. One time was drunk with the wife and we just watched from the porch. Wasn't till my daughter asked what are they doing when we were all out in the backyard that I decided to take action. It was Christmas. I gave them some curtains. Went to college in a big city. Our freshman dorms were directly across the street from another university's freshman dorms. There was a hot girl who used to open her blinds then take off her clothes and do stuff naked all the time. She definitely liked the audience. She was hot girl. Another kinda chubby chick used to have sex in bed near her window all the time. She was sex girl. Halloween comes around and she's dressed like a milk wench. Brings a dude home. So now she's sex wench. A few weeks later, sex wench brought a dude home, and after they're going at it for a few minutes, she's consoling him as he cries sitting up on the bed. Don't know what went wrong, but now she's mean sex wench. Some dumbasses in our school wrote in giant font on our side of the street "show us your tea" and put it in their windows. Even naked girls started closing her blinds after that. It only takes one bad egg. NYC, high-rise office in Midtown. Had an apartment building directly across from us, maybe 50 feet away of similar height. Every morning at 9 AM on the dot, this drop-dead gorgeous woman would take a shower, which had a window in it, and the blinds were wide open like 90% of the time. She knew what she was doing. That conference room was booked out months in advance, and we had a standing rule that you couldn't have reoccurring appointments at 9 AM for it. I'm pretty sure we made up expensive projects solely to snag it at times. Your management should have done a study into how work satisfaction and productivity were affected by having 9 AM meeting in that room. Work's gotta have its perks. This is about as far away from the big city as you can get, but it was still weird as frick, so here we go. I was heading up north with my family to a cabin we would rent every summer, and as we passed through one of the little towns on the way, I looked up at a 2-story house. The second floor only had one window, but the curtains were pulled aside and I could see a guy dancing in the window wearing nothing but a pair of tighty whities. Had this huge brown afro and a beard. I didn't know who Bob Ross was at the time, but looking back I'd say he looked like him. TLDR. I saw a dude who looked like Bob Ross dancing in his underwear. In someone's window, a woman masturbating. I was walking by. Window was large. She was sitting there going to town on herself. I walked away quickly. In a car window, a guy getting head from a woman in the parking lot of a Toys R Us. Out in the open, a homeless man fingering a homeless woman on the stairs of a metro station. Those are some interesting walks you take. Nothing. I'm so salty about this too. I deliberately moved to the city to see wacky stuff like this. Downtown Seattle and not a bare butt in sight and the many hundreds of windows I can see. Lots of boring people. Come to 3rd and Pike. Plenty of naked homeless people, puking homeless people, fighting homeless people, injecting homeless people, not moving so the ambulance has been called homeless people, and Jehovah's Witnesses and Scientology guy handing out pamphlets. Took a vacation to an adult-only private resort on a tropical beach. While the beach was beautiful, I had an amazing and huge private balcony overlooking the ocean, so I would go back to room around 4 every day, order room service, shower, and then lay out on my balcony until sunset. Well, being that my room was on the highest floor, I was totally cool with tanning nude. Walking straight from the shower onto the balcony butt naked is quite empowering. That is until dinner on the 3rd night, where I proceeded to walk into the restaurant and be greeted by a couple who extended a hand and introduced themselves. I say "nice to meet you," to which they commented something along the lines of, "Well, everyone's met all of you already." Turns out, the adjacent rooftop pool and club overlooks my balcony. I was called the European nudist for the rest of the trip. I'm American. Lesson learned. I used to live on the 24th floor of a sky-rise condo building directly across the street from the W Hotel in Midtown Atlanta. I saw lots of crazy things. A Ferrari losing control and crashing into a row of parked luxury cars in front of the building. People having sex up against the windows. Convention attendees over drunk. High, running around in rainbow-colored leotards in the middle of the night. Police chases that ended in the street directly below my building. But the wildest occurrence was in February 2015, at about 1 in the morning, and I was nestled into bed watching Game of Thrones, cuddling the cat and all around living the best life. This incident started with a very loud, "Frick you, punk butt," be followed by a few grumbling and echoes of people trying to calm someone down. Maybe a minute later I hear, "Come on then, come on." then followed by lots of hoops and hollers and oh 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 oh. Stop 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 stop. I hopped up out of bed at this point and saw a group of about 10 people fighting in the horse show driveway of the W. They fought for about 3 minutes before breaking into 3 groups who went in different directions. One group into the hotel parking lot, another back into the hotel, and the last group headed down the street towards Piedmont Park. The police showed up, lights and sirens wailing, and everything was calm for the rest of the night. The next day I was out on my balcony smoking a cigarette and the same group came outside and started brawling a second time. Same scenario. Police came, but this time someone was taken away in handcuffs. Come to find out later that it was Bobby Brown and his entourage fighting with family over Bobby Christina Brown, who had been found in a coma a few days before. Sad stuff. I had a neighbor across the laneway, but a floor down that was a smug prick. Tennis, golf, drove a sob, real wannabe classy but mega pompous. He and his ridiculously mega hot girlfriend were always on the patio drinking white wine, listening to jazz and crap. One day I go out on the porch to smoke a cigarette and I can see right down into his living room window. I can see the usual 2 glasses of white wine and faintly hear the usual jazz in the background. What was different was that he is getting absolutely pounded in the butt by this behemoth black guy. I guess he just had to have it all. Why is the rug all wet, Todd? Redditors who have had neighbors from heck. What happened? A lady moved in and lied that her dog was a service dog because these apartments did not allow dogs or cats, but can't deny a service animal. This dog was no service dog. It didn't even have basic obedience training and she would turn it loose all day long in the communal gated courtyard. Never cleaned up after it, and it was annoying as frick because it would, playfully, chase everyone and harass everyone because it was starved for attention. She got tons of complaints, but because she kept claiming it was a service animal, there was nothing to be done. She eventually got evicted after getting a second dog she let run feral and crap everywhere too, which she never cleaned. Because obviously no one has 2 service animals that are literally never inside with the person. The landlord found out when she left she was also one of those hoarder people and left her apartment packed full of all kinds of crap and filth, including bags of clothes she had been stealing at night from those charity donation bins they set up in parking lots. She was just a vile individual. In this apartment my uncles lived in was connected to the neighbors by the bathroom, so they shared the bathroom. The neighbor lady was crazy and some mornings they would wake up and she would be in their apartment doing some creepy, weird crap. One morning they recall they woke up and she was standing over them, over their bed, watching them sleep. That was the breaking point. They got the heck out. We lived in what seemed to be a mansion type of house, rented out to 3 different families. My family lived on the bottom floor, and a family of 6 lived above us. A mother, father, and 4 daughters aging from 4 to 13. Every morning they would stomp around the house like little elephants and make as much noise as possible to wake each other up so they could prepare for school. After they were ready, more often than not they would refuse to actually go out the door to go to school, screeching as loud as they can until the parents decided to let them stay home. Since we were on the bottom floor of the place, we had free reign of the backyard, whereas the other 2 families barely bothered to use it. They would frequently dump garbage and other random stuff off of a balcony into the yard and never bother cleaning it up, which we'd have to tend to daily since we had 2 dogs and an outdoor cat at the time. It was all a nightmare. When they were eventually kicked out by the landlord, she asked my mother to clean out the room's floor they were living in. She told me there was over 100 2-liter soda bottles scattered throughout their place, as well as mold growing in multiple rooms with foul odors everywhere. Though the oldest daughter was the same age as me and I had a huge crush on her, she was a very polite and clean girl, which is saying a lot considering what her family was like. We talked with her family about letting her move in with us while the rest of them left. I feel like it would have been better for everyone if she had stayed with us, but it never happened. I really hope she doesn't live with her disgusting family anymore. I truly felt horrible for her. Every morning they would stomp around the house like little elephants and make as much noise as possible to wake each other up so they could prepare for school. To be fair, it's just a house, so they were probably just living as normal people would. Converted houses don't have the nice noise dampening structures that most apartments would have between floors. Had this dude next door. Our bedrooms shared the same wall. He had this subwoofer that was louder than the horn of Hammerhand. Guy would listen to strictly heavy beats. I hope he's in a ditch somewhere, naked with no other earthly possessions except for that subwoofer. Back when I was a little kid, my next door neighbors did hard drugs and were always loud and had women over. One day they got raided by the SWAT, and as it turns out the squad leader was my hockey teammate's dad. He chuckled when he saw me through the window and chatted with my dad for a few. Was pretty cool to watch and see their guns and suits. 10/10 will remember for the rest of my life. My house got raided. Not exactly a raid, but they did barge in with guns drawn, but once my dad woke up and they realized everything was fine, they just left by police when I was about 6 and I slept through the whole thing somehow. I have super religious neighbors. They hang signs for the local church camp on their property act. They kept putting our garbage cans in our driveway. While it was stupid and annoying, it became more and more aggressive. They would trespass on my property and do damage to my house. But I could never catch them in the act. So I did the only thing a sane person would do. I put on my velvet ritual cloak and made a show of putting a salt circle around my property, chanting and carrying on. Never bothered me again. We have a beautiful pit bull boxer mix that was stolen out of our backyard by our neighbors and given to a shelter for pit bulls. We looked for our dog for weeks, all day and night. Just as we were about to give up, my mom checked local adoption ads and found our dog. The shelter she was given to was literally a block away from our house, and they informed us of the people who brought her there, who turned out to be our neighbors. So we got our dog back, and the neighbors continued to try to get our dog taken away from us by calling the police for animal abuse multiple times, even when we were playing with her in our own backyard and very obviously loved her. My first apartment was a real dump in a seedy complex, and I had two people who I'd consider neighbors from heck. The first was the lady who lived above me, who let her small dog pee and crap all over the balcony, meaning we basically couldn't open our back door in the summer because of the stench. She also smoked weed constantly and asked to borrow money several times. When they moved out, they had to tear up all the carpet and deep clean the whole place. She had no teeth, too, which was weird. Another was a guy who lived a few spots down from us. One night I could hear him fighting with his girlfriend through my window, so naturally my girlfriend and I were content eavesdropping on it until we heard a loud smack. Immediately I called the police and off he went to jail. When he returned for his stuff, it's my understanding that he got a grade A butt whooping from several of her friends who were there to welcome him home. Freaking Jay lived across from me, and he'd spend all weekend blasting rock music and singing along. This would go on all day and all night. He was a drunk, so while blasting his music, he'd be drinking, and then he'd start coming out into the hallway and screaming at other tenants for perceived wrongs, like not giving him a freaking toonie for something or other. I called the cops on him twice and complained to the landlord at least a dozen times, and absolutely nothing was done about it. Eventually I found a new apartment in another city, and when my landlord tried to tell me I'd have to pay for 2 months instead of the 1 month notice I'd given, I sent him a long email, with my dad's help, about how nothing in the apartment was up to code and he'd ignored my requests for him to deal with Jay. So did he really want to press the issue with me? Turns out he did not. House across the street raided by SWAT D. Man was taken. Woman left behind. She now has an axe to grind with any and everyone on the street, and her kids are a bunch of little shoots too. My neighbor across the road at the moment is this typical disgusting obese white trash Australian single mum. All day long she screams at her kids in this high-pitched voice similar to a banshee, telling them they are freaking stupid little shoots. And speaking of the kids, they recently got a motorbike that she lets them race up and down the street all day and literally all night. I have heard them absolutely charging down the road on this thing at 11 at night. She's so lazy she drives across the road to her parents' house, which, lucky for me, is right next to my freaking house, so I have to listen to her voice through the paper thin walls of the duplex we share. She lets her kids have parties, so there's always drunk 15-year-olds playing crap music and being little C till God knows when. I'm moving in 2 weeks simply because I can't stand to hear her rank voice and watch her plod around her garden like a fat gnome. Watch her plod around her garden like a fat gnome. That is pure freaking poetry, right there. I've only had 2 apartments in my life. First apartment was when I was 18. lived in a Section 8 apartment building. Neighbor had some sort of mental disability and his wife was completely blind. They would constantly file noise complaints and bang on the walls. My roommate and I were never even that loud. We would watch TV at a reasonable level, and if we started laughing, bang bang bang, dude would scoff at us from his balcony when we were walking to and from the apartment, and call us names. He filed his third noise complaint when we had a couple friends over for Thanksgiving. Cops came to the door and were like, sorry to bother you. On that third one we got evicted, but we didn't fight it because our lease was almost over anyway. Second apartment, I'm 24, neighbors above me are loud as crap. I mean raging parties until 3-4 in the morning. Beer pong, loud bass music. Asked them many times to keep the noise down, but the dude always gets in my face saying he has a right to do what he wants in his own house. Threw tons of cigarettes off his balcony and blamed it on my girlfriend and I. They finally moved out, but I will never live in an apartment again. Pet hoarder next door. Unkept yard. Monstrous amount of fesses kept in a garden shed on the edge of their property, amazingly right beside our deck. We always wondered what was going on over there. Then a flyer shows up in our mailbox. Lost male iguana, aggressive and will bite. Do not approach. Please add a number. Thafuk.com. A few days later, animal control arrives with trucks and vans. They get into this house and pull out hundreds of animals. Exotic birds, lizards, cats, dogs. It was insane. All were sick or injured. She had specific rooms for them, like a blind animal room or pregnant animal room. No word on that aggressive male iguana. Might still be creeping around that neighborhood, aggressively biting children perhaps. We had a noisy neighbor for a while. The guy liked having parties. Once or twice a week we could handle, but he started having them more often. Then one week he decided to have loud parties every night, which wouldn't have been much of an issue, but he liked having them in his bedroom and kept his music blasting and his friends making a racket until 6-7 am. I couldn't sleep through his crap, and for a week straight I had no real sleep apart from that hour lull between 7 and 8 am. I was getting in trouble at work for being exhausted when it wasn't my fault. After a few days of this and getting nowhere with him, we wrote a letter and posted it through his door just before the time his mum gets home. Turns out it all went quiet at 7 because that's the time she got home. She found the note on the floor and read it. I was happy to be woken up by her screaming at him. If he had been smart and kept his parties downstairs, everything would have been fine, and we even stated it in the letter we sent them. Parties didn't happen very often after that, and he moved out a few years ago. They called the police on me because I was watching television muted with closed captioning with the windows closed and the blinds shut in my own home at 7 o'clock on a Friday night. When we had moved in, my roommate brought the neighbor a plate of cookies and all of our phone numbers and names, and said to always feel free to call us any time of day and we'd do what she needed. Our neighbor said, no, we'll call the police instead, and boy, did she ever. We actually started throwing parties because the cops were going to come anyways. I used to live next to two lesbians. One night, one of them came by lamenting her lost lover. She ended up screaming for her and breaking her window with her fist. I had to call the cops and they came to arrest her. She then claimed she had PTSD and ran away, only to be tased and caught seconds later. The two of them had a few more screaming matches before finally moving out. When I was a kid, we lived next door to an awesome dude and his wife. One day, they moved out due to losing the house to the bank. Next thing we know, a skeezy trucker. I know not all truckers are bad. I was one who would routinely fight with his wife on the front yard. They built a fence all the way around the property immediately. Fast forward a few years of antics and shenanigans by these people. We get a knock on the door. My father was arrested for destruction of private property because they said we hit their fence with stuff and broke it. Now this is where the story gets good. In court, they presented blatant pictures of a completely different fence as evidence. My father had pictures of their fence, and the judge sent the sheriff out to take his own pictures. They were found in contempt of court for cussing the judge and falsifying evidence, and got arrested on the spot for threatening a judge. Dad immediately sold the house and we moved out, but he got the last laugh as he sold the house to the bailiff of the court they were in. So, now his next door neighbor is the man who arrested him. He died of an overdose shortly thereafter, and they lost the house to the bank after he was gone. Neighbors from heck. TLDR. Neighbor falsified evidence in court. Bailiff bought our house next door to him and he OD'd. This guy I used to live next to got a divorce and his ex-wife moved out. I think she left him for another guy. About 6 months before I moved in, he got involved with M&H, and he started letting girls and dealers work out of his house. His property went to crap. There were constantly shady folks around. I kept finding used condoms in the gravel dirt shoulder we had instead of sidewalks. The police started showing up constantly as other neighbors called in the crap they were doing there. After about 2 years of this bulls, the house caught fire and the dude died. Apparently he had a heart attack while smoking M in bed and the pipe set his sheets on fire. The house didn't burn down, but it was gutted and condemned, and things got quiet after that. And then my landlord decided to jack the rent beyond what I could pay. I'm 100% she evicted me illegally, but I didn't have the money for a lawyer to fight it. This very OCD lady who came out every morning to pick up the fallen leaves and cleaned her garden. It was her compulsion in a sense. Anyways, she ended up calling child services on another neighbor and her son. They ended up just dumping all leaves and garden waste on her garden and started a war between them. TLDR. A garden neat freak of a neighbor called child services on another. Drinking beer out on the front porch during a Saturday evening. Called the police. We were all of age so the police said to keep it down. This happened multiple times. The cops stopped asking for IDs. Their dog would be left off leash in the front yard. When completing our runs, the dog would charge around the corner and bite one of us. They said we should know better. Complained when people would park near their house. Threatened to tow multiple cars. I don't drive much because I bike most places, but this frickin' dude next door called the cops the first day I moved in because my car is too loud. The cops showed up and were total car guys. Ended up sitting in the driveway revving my car up because the cops thought my 060 was the crap, which it is. Waiting for the other guy to show up saying you're the neighbor from heck. One of my friend's neighbors are absolutely bat crap crazy and a racist, white supremacist. My friends are Muslim and Pakistani, so their neighbors are always looking for excuses for calling the police on them. One of the most memorable stories was when their eldest son, who was 14 at the time, broke his leg at school and could not walk. His dad was on a business trip, so only his mother had to bring him home from the and help him in. Given that he was over 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds, this was much harder than it seemed for his barely 5 feet 5 inches mother. To make it easier to help him in, she parked the car on the lawn right in front of the door so she wouldn't have to drag him across the sidewalk. All of this seemed too shady for the neighbors, and instead of using their eyes or just asking, they called the police for suspicious activity. So now the poor mom had to deal with her broken son and the police showing up at her door to investigate. Along with this instance, the neighbors call the police on them whenever they have a party, even though their parties have no music, no drinking, or anything to warrant the police. But every weekend they blast music themselves and rowdy backyard parties. Because of them, my friends are looking to move. Very late here, but just wanted to add, what a bunch of C. Upstairs neighbors used to get drunk and pee off their balcony, jump up and down and listen to classic rock at a really loud volume. My pops was fresh out the pen and didn't want to get into any trouble, so he politely talked to the husband. Things were okay for a while, and then one day the daughters came down and started throwing those little spiky balls that fall off the tree at my sisters and I. Their mom was laughing and encouraging them. My sisters beat the heck out of both of them, and then the mom decided she wanted to fight my sisters. They were like 12 and 15 at the time. Well, my mom is a straight up lunatic when it comes to her family. When my mom got home, she went upstairs and started pounding on the door. The lady wasn't home, so my mom did the only logical thing left to do and snapped her broom. About 15 minutes later, this big bee came bumping her gums and Mardukes was waiting for it. My mom is only 5 feet 2, but she's about that action. Before she could get down the stairs, my mom hit her with a 2-piece and the behemoth yelled for her husband. That was mistake number 3 for them. Her husband raised his fist to my mom and my mom let go of his wife and started scrapping with him. My mom beat the heck out of him. My dad was walking in from work and sprung into action. He threw my mom off the dude and beat the frick out of him while still holding his coffee mug and jacket. About an hour later the dude showed up with 2 of his biker buddies. My dad went out and beat the frick out of all of them. That family moved a week later and my parents were the heroes of our apartment complex. Old oil rules. When my daughter was 5 we rented the top floor of a 2-family house. The owner gave the bottom floor to her sister, recovering substance abuse problems, trouble holding down a job, 2 kids, absentee father. One day my daughter's tricycle went missing. Found her kids on it an hour later. Confronted her about it and she said my daughter was spoiled and my family didn't deserve to have anything her family didn't have. My husband was on disability recovering from a life-threatening injury, and I was a school teacher. So, not exactly the Kardashians. When the 30-year-old woman began to taunt my daughter and take her belongings, that's when we terminated our lease. My neighbor in my apartment complex always tries to stop and talk to me, usually when I'm running late for work, which isn't awful. The awful thing is I'm pretty sure he looks out the window and waits. He always manages to open the door and come outside as I happen to be walking by, and goes in promptly after I tell him I'm running late for work. Same neighbor came outside at 11:40 one night as I was putting a new window decal on my car, practically climbed in, and insisted on helping me, then proceeded to try to talk to me afterwards. Another time I was backing out of my parking spot, and he was pulling out of his in my blind spot. He honked his horn so obviously I stopped before I hit him. Instead of him pulling forward and leaving like a normal person, he put his car in park and came over and knocked on my driver's side window and asked me if I even looked back before I started backing out. It was really aggressive. He's also jokingly said to me that he's seen me bring a lot of men into my apartment. I really don't like that guy. He's very creepy. Yeah, I got a bad vibe from that guy through your post. Jesus. I've posted it a couple of times before, but basically, one night, she had a loud argument with herself which turned into a loud argument with the neighbors, which turned into a home invasion of the neighbors, which turned into a home invasion for me and dang near getting stabbed. Goddammit, I always get to these threads too late. I moved into a new housing development a few months ago. My backyard has a slight slope to it which leads to a neighbor's house down the hill. I had my car in the back of the driveway washing it one day when I noticed downhill neighbor lady taking pictures of me and my GF with her iPhone through her window. I thought this was strange, so after I finished washing the car, I knocked on the door and calmly asked why she felt the need to take our picture, and she launched into a yelling, cursing monologue about how we were psychopathic buttholes who were trying to poison her dogs with car soap. So basically, she thought that 3 ounces of car soap, diluted by 10 gallons of water, then diluted again by rain, would wash down into her yard, settle in her grass, and then somehow be toxic enough to prove deadly to her dogs, via fumes. I tried to reason with her, but she just kept yelling that soap was made of chemicals and that I was a freaking butthole, etc. She called the police while I was standing there and they literally refused to come. TLDR. Crazy neighbor lady thought that me washing my car was an unconscious assassination attempt on her dogs. I win. I live in a very old house with a very old garage. In fact, the garage was built as one structure, with a dividing wall, and the adjoining section of the garage belongs to the neighbors. Think, one structure, 2 garages, 2 properties. One day, new neighbors move in. Before we get the chance to say hi, we get a letter in the mail from the attorney of our new neighbors. The letter explains that the neighbors will be assuming ownership of our half of the garage. They will be kind enough to pay for maintenance, and we can use it to the extent that they are not. We have our lawyer write them a letter kindly asking them to frick off into the sunset. That's that, or so we thought. One day, Sport next door decides he's going to paint a portion of our half of the garage. We went out the next day and painted back over. The neighbors eventually defaulted on their mortgage and had to move out. Kinda surreal experience. In an apartment, We have a schizophrenic neighbor that has been terrorizing residents for the last decade. From her sibling, the explanation is that she mixes alcohol and hard drugs with her prescription medicine for her condition. She can go months without incident, and then something every few days for months on end. She's a legal carer for her elderly and invalid father, who owns the apartment. It's now at the stage where, upon legal advice, we have to wait until her father dies to forcibly evict her. It's really sad, but she has all the help in the world. Many people have felt sorry for her and tried to assist her, even financially, and she just burns everybody. Police and social services are unwilling to do anything. Some of her exploits: she has successfully applied 2 violence orders on 2 residents, both elderly women, who supposedly ganged up on her in the elevator, physically abusing her. 2 nice little old ladies. They can't come within a certain distance to her, which in a building with 1 elevator is laughable. Regularly lays in wait, following certain residents, soft targets, leaving the building, waits for them to be in a public place, and then verbally attacks them in a public space, trying to humiliate them. Calls people in the building, mainly between 2 AM to 5 AM, accusing them of making suspicious noises, spying on her and conspiring against her, and chain smokes and leaves her front door open, leaving the foyer on her floor in constant stink of nicotine, defacing and destroying anything on the notice board that she doesn't approve of, constructing a bizarre cardboard box for her car in the garage, and refusing to remove it despite an ever-growing rodent family calling it home. The people on her floor are terrified, and even paid for cameras so they would have evidence if she assaulted them. She summarily destroyed multiple cameras, the last time by burning them. The police advised not to replace them after that, because of the fire risk. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.